Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. I'm Professor Victor and I spent the weekend at WonderCon in Anaheim, California. And I thought I'd take you through my trip, which wound up being pretty darn great, and kind of just going over some of the cool horror-related stuff that I got to see and merch that I got, and basically just kind of give you a lot of the pros of the con, if you will. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. All right, I am headed in for day one of WonderCon. We're gonna cruise the floor, see if we can get into some horror-related stuff, see if I can find anything cool to show you guys. Stay tuned. We'll let you know if I found anything cool in just a second.
That is definitely it's a reflection.
If only I had more wall space. Yeah, we may not have time to do an escape room. We'll see. Hey, thank you so much, man. Might have to buy more of these. These are just really awesome.
We have a lot more online.
Actually, romance.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Try what you like, and then when you're ready to make a commitment, you can either yes, the instructions on there. It's an ECT. Have you ever prepared those before?
Yeah. Picture peeps.
I just don't have enough wall space for any of this.
The fact that you saw me in my vest made it worthwhile. That's incredible. I didn't get to pick, but
I'm seated for the 40th anniversary Aliens panel. Super hyped for seeing this one. Vasquez is supposed to be here. Hicks supposed to be here. It's gonna be pretty cool.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Jeanette Goldstein. Let's give a big WonderCon welcome to Mark Ralston. There he is. Or she.
Always has to get in the
Can't
shot.
tell. All right, well, you better go. Ripley's coming.
I mean, I think it's a classic story. It's a war story. You know, that's the genre, and of a troop of soldiers who go out. I mean, you can do it. Whichever period, whichever war you want it to be, and I think it has to do with the film takes its time and to let the audience understand every one of the characters. If you watch it, you're amazed at how slow compared to a movie nowadays. It's like it just sets right off, which is a mistake. You get to really learn who everyone is before you start killing them. So, yeah, no, I mean, there's the difference between, there's acting and then there's access. And there needs to be access for all types of actors. So, but everybody, I ain't Irish either, so.
4:30 a.m. call, and they say, okay, 5-mile run. Go, and they're barking, and it's like we're Marines, right? So I take off, and then I could hear from the background after a bit, it's like Paxton going, hey, like, do I really have to do this, man? 'Cause I just got off a flight, and I got a little jet lag, and they're like, Marine, you won't do this! So that was already in character. Hats off to Michael. I mean, he literally gets a call, is on set a day or so later, and stuffed himself into James Remar's equipment. But you'll see next time you look at the film, it's like slightly ill-fitting, and Michael, yeah, because you get this thing off because it was too small for him. Michael was a much bigger guy, and Michael hated it, because we all got to personalize our gear, and Michael just hated what James Remar had put in his gear, but there was no chance. We'd already started
Well, because
filming.
he'd put a heart, right, he'd etched a heart right through his heart, and then Michael goes, that's a fucking bullseye.
Little back history, Jim Speck wrote the script. That means he just had seen Alien, and Speck wrote this idea.
As a fan.
As a fan. Took it to Fox. They said, well, we really like it. We'll buy it off you. And he said, no, I'm
He said, but I just directed Piranha 2. They were
Not
that
one of the
impressed.
greatest sequels ever made.
No.
But the point being, between the time that he first took it to Fox to the time the movie was made, well, of course, in between time, Fox said, well, look, go away and make a sci-fi action feature, and then we'll talk. And genius of James Cameron, he makes Terminator. Come on. But I'm sure, like, in the 8 years in between the first draft and when it was made, he's such a perfectionist. And the reason why there's so many great lines and just character development is because I think he was constantly tweaking it and just going back over it. He's that kind of guy. But the dialogue in this film, albeit, a sci-fi action feature, is just priceless. Priceless. Like, that's not to denigrate anything, but, recent iterations of Aliens, like, some of the action is phenomenal, some of the technology great, but really crappy dialogue. It was a MG-42 anti-aircraft machine gun. Fully working weapon. The Jim in his...
It's usually on a tripod, on the back of a truck, so.
Steadicam technology was brand new, and who but Jim would think, let's put a gun on it.
And so it was like 75, 80 pounds, but the arm, takes a lot of the weight. Now this picture, I'm not wearing the Steadicam unit. So
That's the real deal, huh?
No, it's
We're
weird.
rehearsing.
We were rehearsing, and I think I hadn't been strapped in yet, so they said just hold on to it. But it kind of balanced it. Although the Steadicam unit, it was new technology, and there were no women Steadicam operators in those days. There are now, thank God. And so they found a unit of the smallest operator there was, who was like 5'8", and I'm only 5'2", and this thing did not fit me, and they're rented. So the Terry
Marsh. No. Terry, oh God.
Oh shoot. Anyway, the arms guy, famous arms guy, he took it off and he soldered it and cut off, the bottom third of it so it wouldn't hit my knees. And there's a beautiful
What's
sunset.
that?
It's fantastic. I love it.
I don't remember that space.
So the using it was really interesting, and so that whole kind of looked like a ballet in a way what we did together. That was really fun.
Yeah, the arm itself probably weighed about 35, 40 pounds. It had a massive spring that could just make the cantilever to make the gun float.
But you had to sit. We learned that you had to sit way back on it, or it would, if you let go of it, it would pitch forward and throw you with it.
Yeah.
We did have a release, like an emergency release thing on it, which was great because in the scene in the APC when it catches fire, when I unintentionally killed my best friend. Sorry, it was a mistake.
Friendly fire.
Yeah, and we're yelling and we're
Literally.
screaming and panicking. Well, we were really yelling, screaming, and panicking because me and Bill and Michael Bean could not breathe because they used, real flamethrower, and it set whatever they had painted the inside of the APC with to age it. it set off this fume, this toxic fume, and we couldn't breathe. And so and Michael pulled my emergency thing to release it, and we all scrambled out, and then they went back and reshot it with a flame effect.
I'm gonna do my death scene, right? So I had the wire tubes running up my leg, up underneath my appliance, fully made up like I had this horrible accident, but then turn away from the camera, I look, normal. But a fully lit flamethrower, right? It's gonna shoot flame 25 yards. All these things will not happen in today's world. They literally do not. They do not happen anymore. Insurance and liability. But here we were in the heyday of filmmaking. Really, it is. You think about it. It's amazing.
Dummy
for us.
bullets, but they're real,
Yeah, 50 caliber dummy rounds we shot. We made a lot of noise. Oh, first of all, they had 3 chemicals in the tubes. One bubbled, one fizzed, and the other smoked. And they were all water activated. So before any of this happened, I had to go hold my breath. They'd spray water on them, things would start bubbling, fizzing, and smoking. I had to turn into camera with the lit flamethrower, fire it directly at James Cameron and the DP.
Behind the screen.
Yeah, who were behind the plexiglass sheet. And then fall amongst a bunch of flame bars, and then wait for 2 really big dudes to come pick me up, and I was like 225, 230, and they lifted me up like I was nothing, put me in front of a helicopter fan to blow the fumes away, and then I could breathe.
Well, it was in the script, the 2 of them, it described Drake as a hayseed from, farmland or whatever.
Iowa.
Yeah, Iowa. And I was, a gang member from East LA. And
Cool.
But and then we were both serving life sentences in juvenile prison. So, and we were conscripted. We were given the choice: either spend the rest of your life behind bars or the rest of your life in the Corps. And that bonded us, but it also why we had nothing to lose. And it made perfect sense why the people who are the bravest, usually the people have nothing, they have nothing to lose. Whereas Hudson, like you said, he had 2 weeks left. Yeah. And that was so, then he wasn't a coward. It was just, he had so much to lose. He was almost getting out, and the 2 of us were never getting out. So I love the logic of his writing. It just makes it so easy to play.
Early on in the shooting, Bill Paxton came to me and he said, "Hey Mark, are you okay with Sigourney?" I go, "What are you talking about? Of course, she's lovely." I go, "Well, what?" He goes, "Well, she's afraid of you, dude." I was like, "She's afraid of me?" Wow. Anyway, so eventually went over and chatted with her and telling her about, my son had just been born, I think 1 year old, and she didn't know she was trying to have a baby, and it was like, oh, so we kind of bonded over that. But the day we were shooting the hypersleep chambers, we all arrived, and being practical effects, like all of those lids had to open simultaneously, but practically, go figure that out, right? And it was a long day. I mean, really, and Jim wouldn't let us out of the hypersleep bed.
The lids weren't working,
and the lids weren't working. They were this, and he said, "No, just stay where you are. We're going to get this right." And so we're just sitting there, and I fell asleep at one time. And then, it was really boring. And then suddenly Sigourney turns to me and she goes, "Hey, Drake." Yeah. He goes, "You know what? I'm not very hairy here." I go, "Yeah?" She says, "But down here." and I went, and then she started laughing. She was like, "I got you, I got you." So yeah, that's my funny Sigourney story. Jim used to say to us, he said, "Guys, this is a roller coaster." It's like always, our energy had to be up. There was never a moment when we're preparing for a scene that you couldn't be jacked up because shit was going down, right?
Definitely, yeah. It wasn't. There's different types of horror. Like the first one was like the haunted house, sort of in space. And Jim, his working title for the film was Grunts in Space.
Okay, so Aliens panel was awesome. We didn't get Hicks, but we got Drake, and he was awesome. He told some great stories. It was just really cool little behind the scenes session, frankly, and had a blast with that one. It's definitely worth going to. Okay, there's a Buffy panel, so of course I'm going to check that out. It's got Drusilla in there, so I'm excited for this. Hopefully it's going to be awesome. I'll let you know in just a second.
We're incredibly honored to be joined by Juliet Landau. She needs no introduction. Producer and writer whose performance highlights include, of course, her iconic role as Drusilla on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the spin-off Angel. And she also co-wrote 2 issues of the Angel comic book for IDW and currently hosts Re-Vamped with Juliet Landau, the first Buffy podcast with a cast member as your guide. Definitely check it out if you haven't already done so. Juliet, thank you so much for joining us. We're also joined by Amy Chase, a writer and fangirl extraordinaire whose published works include comic books, tarot decks, and more from popular brands such as Critical Role, My Little Pony, Dungeons and Dragons, Ghostbusters, and more. Amy has a new original crime miniseries releasing from IDW later this year called Fixation, which focuses on themes of toxic fandom, serial killing, and media obsession through the lens of a fictional teen romance vampire franchise. Amy, thank you so much for doing this. We're also joined by Sarah Gailey, a Hugo and British Fantasy Award-winning best-selling author of speculative fiction, comics, and essays. Their nonfiction has been published by dozens of venues internationally. Their fiction has been translated around the world. They have written comics for Marvel, EC, and Boom Studios, including multiple original series. Gailey wrote the 16-issue comic book series The Vampire Slayer, which was published across 2022 and 2023 by Boom Studios. And they are the editor and publisher of Stone Soup and Love Letters, Reasons to Be Alive. You can find links to their work at sarahgailey.com. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Next up, Marcia Powers. She's a California real estate broker known as the Real Estate Slayer for more than 3 decades. She's also an original era fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and active in the fandom organizing since the early 2000s. Marcia is the founder and president of Fandom Charities, Inc., a nonprofit that brings fans together to support local causes through community-driven events. Her fandom work began with early fan gatherings and organizing efforts, including the Los Angeles rally for the Save Angel campaign. And the Buffy fandom was one of the early examples of what scholars now call participatory culture. Fans didn't just watch the show, they organized rallies, charity events, message boards, and real-world gatherings. Marcia has been part of that early wave, and today she produces HellmouthCon, a convention celebrating Buffy's legacy while raising money for charity. She believes the core lesson of Buffy still resonates today, that ordinary people working together can make the world better. Thank you for joining us, Marcia. And last but not least, we have Don Aguilio, a comic, gaming, and literary artist with a background in fine arts among production and stage design. He entered the comic industry through self-publishing his creator-owned series Rise, then further into the comic industry when he joined the stable of Todd McFarlane's Spawn, currently providing covers for the Spawn Universal titles. His DC work includes contributions to titles like Aquaman, Superman Unlimited, Green Lantern, Justice League, The Atom, The Outsiders, as well as DC Pride and Halloween Anthology with covers for other Image titles, Dark Horse and Boom Studios. He is currently a prolific individual in indie comics and is a mainstay on projects from host of independent publishers, also providing game art for Disney and Ravenberger's Lorcana, Upper Deck and Marvel's Legendary, Second Tier Marvel's Snap, and Lazarus Rising's Overpower. He's in current development for a self-published horror anthology to explore Filipino-American immigrant experience with Philippine urban legend and horror mythologies.
I was cast brought in season 2, and it was funny because a friend of mine who was a talent manager, I remember I read the description of the character, and I was going to go in for a meeting, and my friend said, "Oh, I don't think you should go in for that." And I'm so glad I didn't listen to him. I didn't say, "Dana, I'm glad I love you, but I'm glad I didn't listen to you." And what was really interesting about the way that, do you want me to tell a little bit about getting cast?
Yeah.
So I went in for this meeting. It was an incredibly creative meeting. It was with Joss, David Greenwald, Gail Berman, and Marcia Schulman, who was the head of casting at 20th Century Fox. And we bounced ideas off each other. They were saying Drusilla could be English or American, and I said, "Oh no, she has to be English in terms of, how old she is." And I started doing a little of Drusilla. I think I wafted up to the ceiling and started talking to her or something. And I left, and before I got to my car in the parking lot, my phone rang, and it was my agent. And I just have to rewind because it's kind of a funny story. A little bit before that, when I got cast in Ed Wood, I had gone in for my first audition and then gotten called back to meet with Tim Burton. And I had this great meeting with Tim, but before I met with Tim, I went to the restroom, and then I came in, I did the meeting, and I left, and I got a call about a week later from my agent, or a few days later, and she said, "Oh, Ed Wood casting called." And I thought, "Oh my God, this is great news." And she said, "Do you have the bathroom key?" I said, "Oh no, there's no way. This thing was huge. They had it on a man's hanger, like huge, so that no one could steal it." And she goes, "Well, you just look in your bag because they said they had it, and then you came in, and then it's gone." And so I look in I'm like, "There's no way. That thing was huge." And all of a sudden I'm looking, and I'm, "Oh my God, I have the bathroom key." And she goes, "Will you go back and bring it?" They literally, it's their only key. So I had to do the walk of shame. And I walked through the whole office, and they were like, thank God, the key." And so when she called a week later, I said, I gave the key back. And she said, no, they actually do want to cast you. So the same thing. I left the Buffy office, the phone call was so fast that I saw it was my agent. I said, "I didn't even go to the bathroom this time. I don't have the key." And she said, "No, they want to hire you." And I said, "Seriously, I'm not even at my car yet." So that's how I was cast.
You know, interestingly, my first exposure was my friend's middle school performed the musical episode as their spring musical. My friend was Dawn, and I had no context for what I had just seen. But it's one of those things that really did feel like when I was ready and needed Buffy, it appeared in my life. I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship maybe a couple months before, a little thing called March 2020. And so when the pandemic hit, I needed something to watch. And it was a coin toss. I went on Twitter and I said, "Hey, I need a show to start, and it's either going to be Buffy or Star Trek TNG." And it was late at night, and all the vampire fans were up late, and everybody was like, "You've got to start Buffy." And so I was like, okay, well, no one chimed in favor of Star Trek. I'm going to watch Buffy. So I am a newer fan, but it was one of those things that this bad dynamic I had been in had been very much about what we shared a lot of things that we watched together, and so Buffy was the first thing I got to do for myself for a long time, and there were no bad memories associated with it, and it just felt so comfortable, and there was enough of the school experience in the 90s lifestyle that I remember, and so it felt very comforting, and the characters became like a second set of friends. And then I did have some friends who we hopped on Zoom to watch some of the biggest episodes, and when there came a time where we could all meet again in person, we had a screening for the musical episode, and it just meant so much to me, and it was one of those things where it's like, there's no better time right now, and it was very comfortable. It was just familiar enough to me, and so it felt like it came to me when I was ready for it and I needed it. And I still haven't seen Star Trek, so sorry Star Trek fans, but Buffy has been my life for those last 6 years now.
And I turned on the television and I watched this young woman walk into a cemetery and start getting into a fight. And I knew how this was going to go. She was going to do a lot of kicking, and she wasn't going to get hit in the face, and then she would do something pretty, and then the fight would end due to circumstances outside her control. And so I was like, and then she got walloped. I watched this girl take a punch that sent her flying, and then spring back up and whoop ass. And I was totally in. I was completely hooked because I was thinking, oh my God, she really gets to fight. She really gets to actually fight. And I was so excited. And so of course, then I was just in it for the duration of the show as it was airing. And then as an adult, as an author, I had an editor contact me and say, do you have any interest in writing Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics? And I made a sound that I don't think a human can actually ever do. And I said, tell me more. And she basically said, you get to do something that's in its own universe of Buffy, in its own continuity. And so I rewatched the first 3 seasons in 2 days to get fresh input. And I realized I was watching these characters who I had loved for so long from the perspective of the adult I am now, looking at the behavior, especially of these teens who are inhabiting a dynamic in their social group that has all the pressures that teenagehood has. And I got the opportunity to say, okay, re-examining these behaviors from the perspective of an adult who's done a lot of therapy and a lot of work on myself, here is the pain that I see in each of these characters, and here's how I would like to write that, and how I would like to write them navigating that pain in a different, maybe less damaging to each other way, that's still difficult and painful at times. And I got that opportunity. I got to write this extended storyline that involves Willow having this layered powers and memories transferred to her without her consent or even understanding of what's happened. And I got to explore the dynamics between these people, the very rich relationships between them. It's one of my favorite things I've ever had to do.
We're living in such a period of division, and there's so much hatefulness and cruelty, and there's a lot of difficulty people are experiencing and pain, and I think the message of Buffy that we can come together to fight the ills of the world is a really important message, and it feels like it's more relevant than ever in terms of what we're living through. As far as the characters, the thing about the writing of the show is the characters are rife with contradictions. So it's not just, oh, this is a good character, and this is an evil character, and this is black, and this is white. And that's how we are as people. And even playing a supernatural character, my character, she was the villainess, but also a character who had had major trauma caused by one of the main characters, and this backstory that's quite difficult and painful, and also this epic love affair. And there's so many different dimensions to the character, so you don't just hate the character. Sometimes you feel sorry for the character, sometimes you love the character, sometimes and I think all of the characters have that. They have human frailties, they have human dimension, and that's why the characters resonate, because it also doesn't become preachy. And the other thing with genre is that, as we all know here, in supporting genre or having worked in genre, is you can explore things about the human condition that you can't do in the same way in a straight drama or in any other kind of format. You can really go to places that affect people, and there's a certain acceptance and safety in a way that to hold that mirror up to ourselves. And so Buffy is a show that did that, I think, very successfully, and one of the reasons that it does have the staying power and that we're talking about it this long later is that who can't relate to the weight of the world on your shoulders at some point in your life? Who can't relate to having a problem and needing to rally yourself to be a warrior and be the strongest side of yourself? Who can't relate to the fact that we're stronger if we come together than if we're battle something separately? It's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but the Scooby Gang is such a central and supportive part to the show. And so I think those are some of the reasons that I think make sense. So in terms of a coming of age story, I think that's always relative. I think that when that period of adolescence and that period of sort of defining who you are and finding who you are is such a monumental part of our evolution as humans, and I think that that is a story that is always going to be relevant. And whether you're going through it at the time that you're watching it, or it's something that you're later looking back on, I mean, that's the thing that's so incredible with the fan base. I was doing cameos yesterday, and I was saying to Ray, one was for a 16-year-old's birthday, and I had like 10 cameos, and the ages were, and one of them was for a 78-year-old. And you're like, that's the demographic. It's basically everybody. It's amazing. And it's also a show that you can share generationally. So you can watch it with your kids and your grandkids. Unlike a show like True Blood, which people made love, and it's a great show, but it's so sexually explicit. You might not want to sit there with your grandkids watching it. It's a different kind of show. So there was a thing with Buffy where it grapples with the human condition, but it also has humor, and it also has action, and it is a genre show. And you can watch it with your kids, and you can watch it with your grandkids. There might be certain episodes you'd wait for something like the body, or certain things that you would wait for in terms of that. But it is a show that crosses all kinds of age brackets as well.
Well, that was okay. I think that the intent of this panel was to talk about the upcoming reboot, which is now not going to happen. The revival's not happening, and I think that changed the kind of the nature of the discourse. It was a little bit different. I think the questions were intended to kind of explore what the new series would do and what it would mean, and didn't quite go there because it's kind of irrelevant in that sense. But it was still cool to see Drusilla there, and some of the other people were kind of interesting, so it was all right. But I think it didn't quite do what it was supposed to do. All right, we just got here, which is downstairs from our hotel. This is day 2. And we're going to go and see a few more panels today. Also try to find some more horror stuff to talk about. Stay tuned. We're going to go and explore a little bit. So they have this pretty cool send help escape room back here. Kind of a long line to go do it. I don't have a whole lot of time to go spend time doing that. And also you get to do it with other people, strangers. And I don't like strangers, so stranger danger. And so probably not gonna make it into that, but it is pretty cool looking. Time to refuel. I'm doing that root beer flow for sure. Heading into the first panel of the day, which is a panel about genre, television, and film, and designing genre, television, and film. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to get, but I'm hoping it's something pretty cool, and I'll report back in just a minute.
In my case, here most recently K-pop Demon Hunters. I was attached to it directly through the creator, Maggie Kan, who was she's the wife of a showrunner of a show I did previously called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts. And as soon as she said it was such a music-heavy project, it was obviously very exciting as a musician to join something like that it's music frontal and it's basically all about.
I would imagine as a composer, music forward is big.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So jumping on to Good Boy, my very good friend and co-business partner, Brian Goodhart, was the co-producer, and he said, hey, do you want to throw your hat in the ring for this film? Sure. Found out 5 months later it was between me and somebody else, and then they sent me the rough cut, and I was just blown away by the point of view perspective of the daughter.
Yeah, again, this movie, it has a really interesting tonal challenge because while it does live in the horror genre, the heart of the movie is really not the suspense and the terror and the dread. It's the very kind of real human drama of all the moments in between the zombie attacks, and how you just kind of get by in your life. And this was all kind of made around feelings just after pandemic lockdown, or during and after. So it really speaks to that, and that's something that I think everyone in the world can relate to. And musically, then the challenge was, how do we make those horror moments scary enough and still have a cohesion across the moments of drama and moments of comedy. And I think the way that we approached it was having a palette of sounds and instruments that can work flexibly through all those tones.
Yeah.
Like we used a lot of bell sounds that were kind of like, bells have an organic, nostalgic feeling. They can also be haunting, and they have a lot of clarity, representing melodic themes that can bridge the gap between all those different tones. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of conversations back and forth about how scary do we need to make this? How much should we address the horror here and the comedy here and so forth?
So I think there's actually kind of two questions here about like setting the overall vibe for the whole film or the TV show with the director. I think their vision for it being so influential on what we do.
Yeah.
And luckily with Good Boy, Ben Leyenberg, the director, had a very clear vision from the beginning. And he had layered in a lot of comp tracks from other very famous horror films in the past that he felt were right aligned with what he was looking for Good Boy. And so setting that initial expectation of what the sound palette should be, like Sam was just talking about, I think is essential. Finding your home within the instruments that you're going to use, that really sets the adjectives that you can find then, to find piercing or hot or freezing, those kinds of adjectives within the context of a cello or a voice or a drum.
It's like cellos are warmer, right? A warmer sound.
Depends. I think I'm a classically trained cellist, and I feel like it's one of the most versatile instruments because you can get from the lowest to the lowest to the highest of the highs and really strange ethereal sounds as well.
I think, again, it depends on the project, but for me, it's a little bit different because I've done a lot of animation.
Yeah.
And animation versus live action, a lot of times you get involved much earlier.
Yeah.
So with live action, a lot of times you're responding to an existing image. In animation, a lot of times you're writing before there's even an image. There might be some storyboards or some like basic visuals, but it's very static. And the music kind of informs a lot of where those things are gonna
That's
move
interesting.
into.
Yeah, so live
much
action is a
earlier.
little different because you guys get it before, you get it after it's
more
done,
responsive,
and you get it more before.
Yeah, in a way, I think a lot of the visuals respond to the music itself. Like in K-pop Demon Hunters, for example, the dun dun dun, that was done musically before it was even put into picture, and that was kind of how it ended up with a, it's three girls and all of that, but that existed in the song before it was even in the visuals.
So the editors match to you.
Yes, exactly. And it happens quite a bit. I mean, Hitmonkey was similar too. You work with storyboards, so there's a lot of flexibility in time.
Yeah.
And then once you do the music, the storyboards are only like one frame every few seconds.
Yeah.
Then the animators can kind of move it to make sure the action fits your hits.
Right.
So it's a little bit different.
Creating that thriller feel was so influenced by the supernatural sound design that my good friend Kelly Osman was doing, and the real world Foley work that our lead sound designer, Brian, whom I mentioned before, and then myself. I was kind of tasked to create music that would be seamlessly intertwined with the sound design.
How much did you have like sound design elements that you had to incorporate in your music and vice versa? Or
Great question, Maura. It was a little bit back and forth, but mostly the music was influencing the actual tuning of the sound design. So my palette, I kept it basically in B minor.
Okay.
And so I asked Kelly to change a drum, lightning strike and thunderclap to actually be
E minor?
A B,
Oh, B, yeah.
And so matching that and matching hits specifically so that you would get a reveal shot of a ghost in the background and that thunderclap hitting right as I teed it up with a May, Sol, and then landing on Do, and having the Do be the thunderclap, and me backing off, no actual musical hit, but letting the sound design be the final tonic. That was a really cool experience to be able to pass those kinds of elements back and forth, and I think they influenced each other in such a way that it's sometimes you can't really tell.
Mira was very clear about the direction the movie was going to go emotionally and tonally, in terms of, as I mentioned before, the heart of it really being the human moments and less so the straight up horror and terror. And our fantastic editor, Jeff Boothby, has a great ear for music, and he had put in a fantastic temp score, which, you know, as all of my fellow composers can attest, the temp can be very confining depending on the situation. But in this case, you know, when you have a lot of trust built up with your people, and vice versa, you can use that as a guide, and then really you know that if you make a different decision and you go in a completely different direction, your director will hear you out, and that came into play a lot in this movie because you know, the way I approached it was really to just, you know, kind of sit back and watch the scenes unfold and feel the feelings that I had spontaneously in engaging with it, and then respond to that, you know, with whatever technical skills I needed to address that.
When you don't have the visual sense, being able to write motives and write little light motives or little themes for each character or location or love theme or something like that, this helps draw the audience directly to that character and remind them who that is,
right,
or where they are on their journey, especially if that theme is evolving over the season or over the...
So it's interesting.
What you hope for when you work with a director and an editor is that you know, you can sort of tell by showing, and you can come up with something that just makes them forget about the temp that they loved and that works. And you know, that's not always possible, but that's the ideal.
I feel like Sam already gave the answer.
Answer.
The perfect answer. But yeah, sometimes it's such a great influence on the early stages of your work, but I tend to veer away from that if it's really not exactly what the director wants.
Yeah.
It's just sort of kind of what they want. But if they are in love with it, you find the core element. What is it exactly that they are really, really vibing with? Because usually it's something a little deeper. That
like it could be an instrumentation, or it just could be like tempo, something like that.
Yeah. Maybe it's one aspect of it that they're like, this is the thing that matters to me the most about its relationship with the cut and the edit that we're seeing. So in Good Boy's case, early on, he had layered in a lot of Bartok from The Shining, actually.
Yeah.
So music for percussion, celeste, and strings. And that was so influential to early parts of what I was writing because the music is so creepy, and it is night music, and it is this strange being out in the woods in the middle of it.
Right.
And so if it is the right thing, then take some of the elements from that, and we're always iterating on our past generations and past composers.
Right.
Anyway, we're building on the shoulders
Sure.
of all of those people.
Absolutely.
I mean, for me, I think in K-pop Demon Hunters, I wrote the Hunter's Mantra, which is something that didn't get as much attention, but was played at the Oscars at the beginning of the performance, and that was really cool because it's all over the film, but it's not, you know, it's not golden, it's not how it's done in that sense. Like, it didn't get as much attention, but it's played more than any other song inside of the film. It's like 26 times. And so seeing it live and getting a spotlight was pretty special.
So there's 6 dream sequences through Good Boy, and it's all Indy the dog's dreams. And so we needed something unique to tie all of those together, and I built an instrument for it. I didn't invent the instrument. The instrument was invented by a Canadian luthier named Fran Riley. But I took his design and I created my own. And I got to work with my dad on making that, and he did the welding for it, and I did all the woodwork, and so that was a really meaningful experience to work with him on that, and to hear it tie these 6 scenes together, and it was the right thing instantly. You know, when you land on something, you're like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay. So I feel
That's
very
gonna make me cry.
intimately proud.
Two of the main characters, Hari and Barb, in their way of kind of dealing with the trauma and the horror of the situation that they're in, which of course is a zombie apocalypse, that they're living through, is they like to dress up in glitzy formal wear and do cocktail hour every evening and like sit at the piano and sing songs. And this evolved into, in the middle of the movie, they sing the song Beautiful Dreamer, and that song kind of became like a touchstone for the essence of the movie, which is really that, you know, in any kind of cataclysmic situation, you have to find something meaningful to hang on to, whether it's your family, your relationships, or just your own self-respect, or your hopes and dreams. And you know, in one of those things that are, you know, my favorite thing in scoring is when you have an idea that you don't even know why it works, and you can't put your finger on it and explain it, ironically for being on a panel, but that it just does work. And so I was able to use my jazz background, which is very rare in film scoring, that I'm able to pull that out. But we bookended the movie with these kind of jazz versions, Beautiful Dreamer. I even got, as like a thing on the radio, a little jazz quartet version of it in the middle of the movie that you could barely hear. But I'm proud of that ending up in the movie.
That's great.
Just kind of having that as a bookend.
Yeah.
Okay, so that panel was very satisfying. I'm always very interested in seeing like the production part of horror movies, what goes into the sound design and the composing. And these people were really interesting sharing their stories. I really love that kind of stuff. So that one hit the mark for me for sure. And now we are rushing to get to the comic art of David Lynch panel. I'm really excited to see this one. I hope it's really good. Obviously, David Lynch is not going to be there, rest in peace, but hopefully this will be really interesting. I'll let you know in just a second.
David Lynch has been part of my mental space for well over 40 years now. Before Twin Peaks, I had gone through this period of time where I've always been a comics fan, an alt movie fan, and then I took a swerve into another territory, shall we say, for a few years. And then when I came out of it, one of the first things I did, or started to come out of it, one of the first things I did was I went to the basement, the video lab at Duke University, and just out of instinct, checked out and watched Eraserhead and Envelop. That was sort of my twist from a very, shall we say, conservative time in my life to where I am today. I have the comic book legal defense fund and lots of things against censorship. We have a really cool panel for you today. One of the people who's inspired this panel is sitting right next to me, Michael Dooley, who wrote an amazing article on David Lynch and comics in conjunction with Twin Peaks Return. Dan Barton, former editor of the LA Reader, is on his way here. I'm looking at the text. And he has an equally historic connection to, even more historic connection to David Lynch, and that he was David Lynch's editor at the LA Reader for the comic strip Angriest Dog in the World, which we're going to be exploring a bit here. So if you, like me, have gone through, Eraserhead, Blue Velvet, through Twin Peaks, and so many of these other films, and reflected on what they meant for your life, you are not alone. You're among friends, and we're going to be talking about another side that you may not know as much about, which is David Lynch's comic art. It's a huge influence on me. So when David Lynch passed, I was thinking about a lot of stuff, and then I discovered that Jeff Lemire is one of my favorite comic creators. Did this, and who sends his regards, by the way, did this amazing piece on 7 things David Lynch taught me for the Blue Rose. And the Blue Rose was one of, you may remember Wrapped in Plastic from the 90s. We talked a lot about Twin Peaks theories, and then Twin Peaks Return comes back, and there's an equally influential series on Twin Peaks and trying to understand it. And the last issue of the Blue Rose featured this meditation on 7 things David Lynch taught me. And that got me thinking, wow, all the things that I've read over the years and people I've talked to in comics who who've talked about the inspiration on David Lynch over the years. There's something here. Like some of you may be aware, I'm also a huge Grant Morrison fan. This is from Screen Rant, where they did an article before David Lynch passed, actually, on the influences of David Lynch on Grant Morrison's Batman, and who specifically described when he was pitching the Batman and Robin series that he did with Damien, as he wanted it to be the Adam West TV show meets David Lynch. Another person who could make it for this iteration of the panel was the amazing Matt Haley. Some of you may be, how many of you are aware of the unpublished Twin Peaks graphic novel, season 2? Oh, okay. So, some of you may know that after Twin Peaks 1989, 1990, this epic thing in many of our lives. Then it goes away. ABC, in a very short-sighted move, did two things. One, they forced the revelation of Laura Palmer's killer, and then two, they killed the series, which left us kind of in limbo. But there was a plan, this is dated 2007, during one of the iterations of the Twin Peaks Complete Series DVDs, to have it accompanied by a graphic novel that would have used the original plan for the original season 3, the unfilmed season 3, with art by Matt Haley. And so these are a couple of his sketches of Bob and Laura. That work was never published because David Lynch, he said he respected the artwork, so he was all on board with the artwork. But as of 2007, he thought that Twin Peaks should never again be completed. Freddie Sykes in The Green Glove, which is actually something that David Lynch had been interested in for years. He'd actually planned to have another actor do some work with his Green Glove, but it manifested in Twin Peaks: The Return, with Freddie Sykes' Green Glove, which, in a coincidence or maybe not, was also very similar to the Green Glove that grants immortality in Tales of the Unexpected from DC Comics back in issue 12, which of course goes back to David Lynch's own childhood from the promotion. 6 Men Getting Sick. Here we're seeing some of David Lynch's earliest film work. And what does he do? Animation.
His first film.
His very first film. It was an amazing piece of work, which sort of gets you're getting into this realm of the surreal, somewhat, I guess you could say, disgusting, some of the sort of the aspects of human existence we don't usually reflect on or see in film. David Lynch is beginning to play with that, and he chooses animation to make this early statement.
And how the film started, how it came about is, well, he was a painter. I want to be a painter. As he was painting, he was thinking, oh man, those paintings could only move. So he basically built this sculpture. It was kind of at the time a kind of a multimedia sort of thing. When in its first incarnation, those heads were having images projected on them. It turned it into a film, and that really hooked him on the idea of film. And then
car blowing up, Sally in the kitchen. I'll call out your name. I am running home from your house. And I love that little thing in the back. Think about Bob, the flying orb, bad thoughts flying above the kid in the house. This happens to be one of my favorite paintings of his. Al God Mom, the dog, he bited me, which is another sort of riff on the comic. You can actually see a little character, the dog.
Barely see it with all the lights on, yeah.
But who's also going to be more familiar to us from, and I'm so glad that Dan is here. We introduced you earlier when you weren't here. Dan, former editor of the LA Reader. I wonder if you want to share a little bit of it, Dan. I wonder if you share your experience with David Lynch and your thought in the world. I'll just so in case they don't know about it, this is the archetype right here. This is truly amazing. That's it. So David Lynch talks. If you've read a lot of interviews with David Lynch, he talks about how he loves routine, because if you have do the same thing over and over again, like his famous going to the Big Boy and having the same.
Oh, yeah. Bob's Big Boy, we're back.
Go to the same place and the same thing every day. He says gives you a lot of room for creativity.
And don't forget the top button.
Talk about the top button.
Top button on his.
Yes.
He always did that.
Yeah. Advertising.
He said,
is
that's,
a-
oh yeah, no,
is
I can't,
restrained.
yeah. He said, I can't undo that.
You gotta do that. He has this sense of constraint creating creativity, which becomes actually, a theme in a lot of fine art theory. Like Raymond Koolhaas talks a lot about this as well, and other people. But David Lynch puts this into action, and he puts this into action decades before a number of the theorists. Angriest Dog in the World is the same panels. And so, for those of you who can't see it, on the left is the same thing every day.
Every week.
Every week. The dog who is so angry he cannot move, he cannot eat, he cannot sleep, he can just barely growl. They're bound so tightly with tension and anger, he approaches the state of rigor mortis.
And we had David Lynch's Angriest Dog in the World, and the artwork had been brought in, but he called in the captions every week, and he called them into me. So for a year and a half, I talked to David Lynch every week on the phone. I got like 2 or 3 times he had an assistant do it. But, I'd be in the middle of a work day, and the receptionist would buzz my phone and go, "It's David Lynch." I'm like, what other job would I have? Or something. It's like, the pizza's here. And I pick it up, and you go, "Hi, Dan." I go, "Hi, David." You go, "Hi, Dan. I got another dog for you." Okay. And we would chit-chat a little bit. What prompted, well, besides his death, what prompted me to write about this was the new version of Dune, because I went back and watched, I don't think I've ever seen it, I watched his version of Dune, and I heard that he didn't discuss it. He didn't discuss it past a certain point. And, he talked about it with me. So anyway, he would call in the captions, and someone in the art department would write in the captions, so the handwriting changed. And apparently he released a collection of them. And the one change he made was he hand-loaded the captions himself. But he would call in and go like, and it would be some, off-the-wall thing like, "Okay, panel 1. I thought you said Sylvia. Panel 2. You meant saliva." And this went on for about a year and a half. But I talked to him about the thing. If you're curious about my relationship with him, I met him once, but it was over the phone. Mainly it was conversations over the phone. We talked about Dune, and he said, "Well, I don't think that the special effects were really up to where I needed them to be. That was the most disappointing part." And then I watched if you've seen his Dune, parts of it are just beautiful, wonderful, perfect, amazing, superior to anything else that's ever been. But they had this actor named Kenneth McMillan played Baron Harkonnen. And he's flying around in the air. This is the scene with the heart plug and everything. And he's just, he's got boils all over his face. And he's like, "Oh, they don't know how such a thing." He flies up in the air, and this black oil drips down on him. And my question for him was, "That black oil that drips down on Baron Harkonnen?" I said, "What is that?" And he said, "I don't know. But it does something to him, doesn't it?" And he started calling in, and he goes, "Well, I'm on the East Coast, and I'm making another movie." I said, "Oh, well, that's great." And he goes, "I can't tell you anything about it now, but I'll let you know when I'm done." I said, "Okay." So he called in these captions, and he called me. He was in LA, and he said, "Well, I'm done with the movie. Would you like to see it?" And I said, "Yeah, I would." He said, "Okay." He arranged for a screening for me at the De Laurentiis screening room, which was just off Sunset, and they had these 2 big lions next to the screen. And I brought a friend from college who had first taken me to see Eraserhead.
And I remember I also asked him at one point, I said, is it true that Mel Brooks produced The Elephant Man? And he said, yup. And I said, what's he like? And he said, not afraid of black and white. And preparing to come here, I found out that Anthony Hopkins thought he was a terrible director and a complete amateur. And speaking of the burger, he had trouble. He was very upset that he couldn't find a place to have a hamburger every day for lunch. But he found one. And he would go there in London, because he shot in London. He went there and he would have a hamburger every day for lunch. And Anthony Hopkins just thought it was. Then Anthony just, you imagine Anthony Hopkins pissed off at you, And he's like, you don't know what you're doing, when he saw the final version of The Elephant Man, he was like, now I see what he was doing. Now I see what he was doing. So anyway, he said the film's ready. We'd like to see it. So I go to the dealer and I bring the friend who brought me to see Razor. And the movie was Blue Velvet. And I didn't hear about it for months afterwards. So I don't know, but maybe I was one of the first people in the media to see Blue Velvet. And imagine going to see that movie and you don't know anything about it. You don't know who's in it. You don't know what it's about. And it was just, oh my God, it was an amazing movie experience. And then he called in, I got another dog for you. I said, what? I saw Blue Velvet. He goes, oh yeah? I said, yes. It was great. Thank you. And I would say, this part was great. Thank you. And this part was great. This part was great. And go, thanks a lot. And I said, that gas that Dennis Hopper breathes, where he just goes, Mommy. I said, what is that gas? He goes, I don't know. But it does something to him, doesn't it? So I was just amazed. I got to talk to this guy for it. And then Blue Velvet came out. It was like this big thing. But anyway, I stayed there for a while. And on a side note, I was asked by upper management. We paid him $25 a week. And I was asked by upper management, see if he'll do it for free. And so I asked him. And he chuckled, he laughed. He goes, oh no. No, you pay for it. But thanks for asking me.
One-armed man makes an appearance. He starts talking about the one-armed man. He does a joke about a one-armed man. The wind comes in a lot. The Wizard of Oz pops up. There's so many, and one of my favorites is the strip of dreams recur in, of course, The Angriest Dog in the World. And one of my favorites is the strip, what is it that is so violently troubling my soul? And the person says, take a look in the mirror. You think about the role of mirrors and the alternate self and the disturbance of this evil self or questioning self that you start seeing in Twin Peaks comes back again and again, and it's right there in The Angriest Dog in the World. And this, just in case you're interested, is the final Angriest Dog in the World, and it just disappears. On the table of contents page one day, instead of the usual back of the paper in section 2 with a strip in the classifies, it's just going, gone. And time and the relationship with the present, the past, the future, and existence is another recurring theme in The Angriest Dog in the World. And I was glad you mentioned the other cartoons, because there's one thing I don't think it's ever been republished. There's this one issue where you all had something called Cartoonville, where you asked all of your creators who were doing strips to reflect on Los Angeles. And David Lynch actually did a strip. This is a feature strip in that on Los Angeles. So this is I know Angriest Dog, that the Barton Press was only 20 strips out of almost 500. I had like 420 or something.
Yeah.
And 9 years of strips almost every week. And here's this other interesting thing as well. There's so much that David Lynch does in playing with cartoons and cartoon art. Thumbland, it was a web series that he did, and it really is this. David Lynch has this very interesting, you say, could say it's a cruder side, but again, he's trying to get past. Yeah, he's trying to get past all this sort of surface stuff that we do. And this is one of my favorites, probably my favorite, is ants. And there's a scene where the lead creator, who's a real dolt, is trying to kill all these ants that are infesting his house. And he tries to spray pesticide on them. But instead of spraying the ants, he sprays himself. And he falls into a dream. See if I can get this out quickly.
One of eight episodes.
There are no kids here, are there? Because there's some naughty language, so I hope you're not offended. See if I can get this. Can you hear this? Is it projecting the sound? No? Oh, sorry about that. That's it.
Got the volume fully?
Yeah, I do. And it just, I'm not sure why. So he falls, you can at least see this. So he falls into a dream. Actually, I wonder. Notice the outlet, like Dale Cooper and the electrical outlet. There was at one point a flash of light when he sprays himself. This is David Lynch reflecting on the experience of working with Julie Cruz and Angela Badalamenti at Twin Peaks. The dream sequence with the singing and the jazz in the background. It goes on like this for a little while. And there's also this interesting scene where the floating head of the woman has a hand, a disembodied hand, an arm float by it, which weirdly enough evokes back to one of the storyboards in David Lynch's Dune, which again is like a prolonged cartoon of all those amazing special effects that I don't think translate as well as in the quasi-cartoon version in the storyboards. Again, there's really deep cut, like Michael was saying about Eraserhead. Pizarre, if you've ever seen Fire, again, I don't have time to show it since we are running out of time. But this too, if you go about halfway through, there's this amazing sequence of symphony music and fire and violins and things burning in humanity. Fire unleashes something both powerful and evil. And again, this appears later. This presages. He's working on this at the same time. He's working on Twin Peaks, this animation, Twin Peaks: The Return, episode 8, the nuclear bomb episode. You see sort of a corollary musically and also an image to the animation he does first. There's this wonderful podcast called The Full Blossom in the Evening. They did an entire episode on Satoshi Kon, both how Kon was in his manga and anime where he was influenced by Lynch, and then also, very curiously, some themes in Satoshi Kon's work then end up showing up in Twin Peaks: The Return, from sort of the fakes in a way. To look at the hairstyle from Paprika on the right, the alternate self on the right. That's Diane. That hairstyle is part of the alternate self in the Diane. And there's another one, I think it's Perfect Blue, where a character also goes from the white hair, red hair contrast like Diane. We could go on for hours, but I decided just to end with a couple of weird things like David Lynch is one of his great unproduced movies. It's called The Dream of the Bovine, about former cow and reflections on consciousness as a human, which of course there's this interesting connection to Skrulls turning into cows at the end of early Fantastic Four. And 40 Past, one of David Lynch's great unfinished works, was he was going to do a cartoon for adults and kids called Snoop World that was in production, and then Netflix would not fund it. So, and then of course he passed away shortly after the fire.
So that one was pretty cool. I'm a big fan of David Lynch movies, and of course I love me some Twin Peaks, but I'm not as dialed in on his other art. And so getting to see some of the cartoons, some of the animation he's done was really neat. The David Lynch stories were awesome. So that one was a pretty satisfying panel. See, how'd it go? Look at this, Indies.
I like it very much. Or indies. Low-key indie.
Hunter just looking for it. Look at that though. Gary said he's out here somewhere, but I don't know where.
We're committing to the bit.
Too much
No problem.
So it turns out we didn't get enough Drusilla last night, so we're going to check out this panel about her podcast. That's actually her right there behind me, so that's kind of cool. I didn't even know she had a podcast, so I'm going to find out all about that and check this one out, and I'll let you know what you think of it in just a second.
Re-Vamped from Juliet Landau is the first Buffy podcast with a cast member as your guide. We just crossed over 350,000 downloads in a very short period of time. We only have submitted, we haven't told everybody this, we haven't announced for a couple of announcements here. We've only submitted to 6 festivals and we won Best Podcast at all 6. We have 4 different types of episodes. So we have rewatch episodes, we have the most in-depth interviews with cast and crew. We have Watcher Dev, since he's English, he gets to be our child. And Watcher Dev does What's New in the Buffyverse and also has a book club that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then we also have episodes with fans, with a lot of fan interaction. So we have trivia battles, we have costume contests, we have all kinds of things like that. So that's our basic structure. And what's really fun, and it was your next question, so I'm jumping your question, is that with the rewatch episodes, so you know how on the show, the posse of Buffy's friends was called the Scooby Gang, like Scooby-Doo, and my character was Drusilla, also known as Drew. So one of my co-hosts on the rewatch episodes is Scooby-Drew, as she's named herself, and it's really fun because I do the recordings with our friend Rebecca, who we call Sire Rebecca, myself and Scooby-Drew, and I'm talking back and forth as myself as me and myself as Drew, and she lends her very distinct POV to the mix, so it's always funny when we're talking about, something terrible with murder and mayhem, and of course she delights in it, or, whatever else goes on. And one of the things that's funny is whenever we're recording, and the response we get back from the fans is people really love Scooby-Drew, so I start saying to Dev, gosh, everybody loves Scooby-Drew, and they think she's really funny, and she gets all the fun stuff to do. And he says to me, you do realize that you're both people, right? You do realize you're being jealous of your own alter ego co-star on the podcast from the show, this fictional character. Oh yeah, it is me, but I'm like a straight person to her, and so sometimes I find myself getting jealous of my own self. I don't know what that says about me. Drusilla thinks now that she is a galactic podcast star. And is definitely getting big, and she's really enjoying the autonomy. Being a woman from Victorian times, she's getting to be on her own and drive the ship a little bit more. And so it's funny because she's branching into things like she sings. Although if you remember from the show, from the run and catch, the lion is cool in the black great patch. She sings on one note. So it's kind of funny because she thinks she's got these dulcet tones and everything she sings is on one note. And also she fancies herself a comedian now, so she makes these jokes and she has a catchphrase. And so yeah, it's really fun because she's kind of evolving and branching out. With Buffy is it uses genre to really explore so many things. And so sometimes we talk about really intense stuff and powerful stuff and with the themes of the episode, but also one of the things that we really wanted to do that Dev was touching on, particularly in this time period that we're living in through and dealing with, there's so much hatred and there's people being pulled apart part, and we really want people to laugh and to have a good time, and so that's a lot of what we're doing. As far as Drusilla used the process that they used in some assembly required to bring back Sid from Puppet Show. And Sid is her gag writer, and so
that tells you the quality of the jokes.
that tells you the quality of the jokes. And Sid's on the show sometimes as well.
You've all watched, you know who Sam Addison is, right? Who played
Holland Manners
on
Angel.
Talk about
Oh.
your friendship to him and what happened.
Yeah, it was funny. So I was friends with Sam for a long time, and we had done work in the theater. We'd done a number of play readings together and things of that nature. And so he had watched my work on Buffy, and then I knew he was cast on Angel, and so I'd seen his work, but we hadn't gotten to work together. And then we were talking, and we finally got, oh, okay, we're going to be in a script together. This is so exciting. And we went to the wardrobe fitting, and we were actually on the Paramount lot. And we were there at the same time, overlapping. And one of the secrets about when you're working sometimes on a series is wardrobe will get the scripts earlier than the cast does. So I would always sneak into wardrobe and page through the scripts to see what we were doing next. And so we were there, and Sam was in his fitting, and I was outside, and I was paging through the script, and I'm looking at it, like, oh, this is good. This is the wine cellar. This is really, really cool. And all of a sudden I went, oh no. And Sam said, what? And I went, well, do you want the good news or the bad news? I said, okay, the good news. I said, the good news is we have some really cool stuff to do. And he said, well, what's the bad news? I said, well, we eat you. And he said, what? And then he comes up and he gets the script, he looks and says, oh no. And I said, well, it is a supernatural show. You can come back. Which he did. He had the elevator sequence, but yeah, that was how he found out that he was no longer going to be on the show for a bit. Buffy fans are the best, seriously. You guys are just unbelievable. It's been a true gift, and I'm honored. And the thing with the podcast that I really love is so many people have been responding back about the scripted elements and Drusilla's catchphrases and stuff, and so they'll write them on social media, or they'll come up with jokes for Drew, or every time actually we pick a different sign-on that a fan has submitted for Drusilla's sign-on for the podcast. So it's very interactive, when I'm not jealous of it, I'm actually excited when I see online people responding and writing and interacting and using Drew's new found catchphrase and all of that kind of stuff. It's really edifying to have it go out there and be mirrored back and be so interactive with you guys. It's fun. Who can't relate to having the weight of the world on their shoulders? And who can't relate to the idea that, especially now when things are so divided, that we need to come together to fight the ills of the world. And the characters are written so well, and they're rife with contradictions, so they're not just good and evil, black and white. They have faults, and they are flawed, and even the villains, like the characters I played, Drusilla, you don't just hate Drusilla, you feel bad for the trauma that she went through, and the terrible past that she's had, and she has a sense of humor, and she has this epic love affair with Spike's character, and so there's so much dimension to them, so I think that resonates, because we as humans, we're not just one thing or another thing, and so I think that's a lot of it. I also think most people can relate to high school as hell. And I don't think that ever changes, sadly. And I think one of the things we also have talked about is the power of genre, and the way you were talking about that it enables us to hold a mirror up to ourselves and look at certain things, the darker aspects of our natures, and explore it in a palatable and more safe way. It opens the doorway for us to be able to do that. And then the show has, it's got that pathos, but it's also got humor, and it's got action. So, you're kind of going between all these different emotions in the space of a single episode, where just when you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so sad about something, then you're laughing the next minute. Truthfully, Drusilla is the character that I would she's such an unusual and more like almost a Shakespearean character. She's almost like Ophelia or Lady Macbeth, and very rare for television. So, I mean, all the characters are wonderful, but I think I would just every time out pick Drusilla because she was a delicious character. I mean, she was so much fun. I think perhaps there could be, and it's one of the things we're exploring in the podcast, with a lot of the different characters, but it would have been interesting to see on the show if she had a redemption arc or some other area she could have gone into. But I think I'd stick with Drew. So my favorite episode or scene to film, I actually have 3 favorite episodes. I would say School Hard because it was our introductory episode, so it's where we first came to play. I would say Surprise because it's where Drusilla gets really strong, and we bring the judge in, and it's just, you know, fun in terms of what we got to do. And then for Angel, I would say Reunion, when Darla and Drew team up, and where we notoriously ate Sam Anderson and ate all the lawyers and wreaked havoc in Los Angeles. Those would be my 3 favorite episodes. And in terms of, in case you guys couldn't hear the question, was how I put the elements together in terms of the accent and all of Drusilla. It was. I feel like every character is its own recipe and literally has its own ingredients. It was interesting because when I was cast, and then they paired me with the final choices for Spike. And the minute that James came in, we had an incredible acting chemistry. And James said he never had this, but Joss actually called me in, and I had a creative meeting with him where he told me he'd had the characters running around in his head for 10 years. And then he proceeded to say all these adjectives that were completely opposite to each other. So he would say, like, she's childlike, but she's sensual. She's delicate, but she's strong. She's sweet, but she's diabolical. And it went on and on and on. And as I was sitting there, I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do that? And then that was the thing that really did make it so delicious and did make it so interesting. I think it was funny because in that very first, I never auditioned for the role. I met on the role, and in that room, they were saying she could be English or she could be American. I said she has to be English, but at the age she is, it would make no sense in terms of it. And they said, okay, if we can get a Spike who's either English or can do it, we'll do that. And I remember I kind of wafted up to the ceiling and talked as Drew to it, and they really were like, oh my God, that's it. And before I got to my car in the parking lot, my agent called and they had booked me for the job. And I literally didn't even have my car key yet in my hand. I was like, are you sure? And so, but it was, and then I had a lot of the different elements came together, and one of them, there was a specific person who I thought, okay, this dialect is perfect for Drusilla. But then with the other elements, the sort of lofty quality, the dialect became a little bit more sing-song, a little bit more whispery, and so it was sort of like layer by layer. As an actor, one of the things that's fun when you do theater work, or when you're working with a character on a series where you get to live with a character for a while, or you have time to develop a character, it's like you bring in one layer, and then you bring in another layer, and you just build layer by layer. And so as I started adding little layers, it was like, okay, well that was the dialect, and then the next layer made it, oh, that's a little bit more sing-songy. And then one of the things I really like to do is something I call taking my character out. So any character that I have, I will go somewhere that I don't usually frequent because, you know, otherwise we're going to go, hi Juliet. And especially if I'm doing a dialect or I'm doing, you know, one time I actually did it with, I was playing a Russian character, but it was funny because the person recognized me and they were, why, are you Juliet Landau? Why do you have a Russian accent? So that didn't work so well. But with Drew, I decided, it's one of the things on a set can be really big. You can have, you know, up to 350 people, and you have to be able to be fluid enough with your work that you can go into it really freely between action and cut. And so I find it great when you go out in public because it's basically the same thing. You're interacting with it, you can keep it going, and you can do all that. You can have that fluidity to just be able to slip back into it. Plus, the way that people interact with you informs so much about your character. So for instance, I was once playing like this very kind of wild, promiscuous, for lack of a better word, trampy kind of character. And when I went out, like the way that people related to me and the way that men talk is so different. I'm like, oh, that's a whole different world, you know. And so it informs a lot about the character. So with Drew, I went to, actually there was this liquor store that was open all night, so I was like, I can go late at night. And I remember I was like wafting up and down the aisles, and all of a sudden there was this woman at the front counter that was freaking out a little bit, and she was obviously not super stable and not particularly well, and you know, was having some issues and wasn't totally right in the head and was having some strife. And I wafted up next to her, and the guy behind the counter was kind of like exasperated dealing with her, and he rolled his eyes and he like looked at me like, can you believe this? I'm dealing with this crazy woman. And then all of a sudden he fixed on my eyes and he froze. And I saw his eyes get wider and wider and wider. And I could see his thoughts. Like, oh my God, another one. And then that moment I was like, okay, I think I got Drew. I wanted to be in the musical really badly. And I got string Joss because I was a dancer, I was a professional dancer, and I sing. So I kept going up to Joss and saying, you know I sing. You know I dance. And he said, yes, I know, but the episode's already written. I said, but you know I sing. And then it was funny because we were laughing about it because again, Drew sings on one note. And so I was like, oh my God, that would be sort of hard in a musical episode to actually do it. And we actually have a lot of, next week's episode's really funny because Drew will bring in certain songs. And we have one that's particularly funny that he had on me and Sarah Rebecca. So we'll usually, we record it because we do it on Zoom where we'll do it, like I do it, sing it as Drew, I sing it as me, and then Sarah Rebecca sings it and then we put them together, but we usually Drew does her bit separate because she means it that way. But so the funny thing is, every time I sing Drew, like we end up in hysterics because it's just like we're singing and we're belting and she's just like whatever song it is, you know, like happy birthday to you, and she thinks it's great, you know. So we can't keep a straight face whenever.
Okay, so that was a lot more satisfying than the last Buffy panel. We got just all Drusilla, all Juliet Landau. And I'm very interested in checking out her podcast now because it seems like it's going to be a lot of fun. But this is a lot more like about Buffy itself, the show, behind the scenes, much more what I wanted and much more satisfying than the last panel. So this was the one to check out. All right, we're seated for the Sci-Fi horror panel, and this one's right in the professor's wheelhouse. This should be pretty good. I'm looking forward to hearing about some sci-fi horror stuff because you know I love it. So stay tuned.
Thanks so much for being here, everybody. I'm Jean-Paul Garnier. I am the proprietor of Space Cowboy Bookstore, which is a science fiction specialty bookstore in the Mojave Desert, and it's also a publishing house. It publishes genre fiction. I'm also the producer of Simultaneous Time Science Fiction podcast, and I am the editor of Electronic Brain magazine, the fanzine Ionosphere. I also edited for Star Online, Galaxy, Worlds of If, Aphelion, and many other genre fiction magazines.
My name is Eric J. Bernard. I'm an author, anthologist, and I also run my own indie press called Dark Moon Books. I'm here in the local Southern California area. My latest collection is a graveside gallery out through Cemetery Dance, and my latest anthology is Staring and Daring out through HarperCollins. And I have a QR code link up here for anyone who would like to directly connect with me. Thank you.
I'm Scott Sigler, sci-fi horror author and podcaster. Been giving away my stories as a free podcast about 2 days ago was our 21st anniversary. So everybody tells you podcasting is a new thing. We've been around for a minute, been around a little while. And these are the books I'll be talking about primarily today, which is The Crypt and the sequel Void Strike, which we're talking about. And I was fortunate enough to write a book for my all-time favorite franchise, Aliens Phalanx, which was out by Titan Books several years ago. But it was just awesome things. Howdy.
I'm Jindy Gammon. I am a Nebula and three-time BSFA Award finalist author of fantasy, horror, and science fiction. I also am a science writer and artist, and I own a small press called Stars and Sabers Publishing that just opened last year. We have Hugo Award nominated and Nebula nominated, the Bram Stoker our roster, and they're standalone anthology works. But I write across genre, and I especially love sci-fi horror. I'm talking about Atacama and Heliopause and some of my favorite movies, and that's right. Hello.
A lot of science fiction is pursuit analysis of the unknown and space exploration, biology research, etc. There's always this kind of, in real science, there's this distant hope that we're going to find stuff that we don't really understand. And horror tends to work really well when it's things we don't really understand. So I think the two kind of go hand in hand. And science fiction horror in particular is related to with somewhat opposite for supernatural horror. So a lot of Stephen King work, for example, ghosts, spirits, there's these things that you can't possibly know what the rules are for it. Whereas a lot of sci-fi horror, like blood music, like Greg Bear's masterpiece there are rules, and you can kind of figure out where things are going if you pick up enough of the clues. So it's almost sort of mystery-based in some ways. So there's a lot of fun in finishing a book or a movie, then going back and watching, you're like, oh, okay, I see all the pieces being put together here, so you get a lot of enjoyment on repeat watches. So I think it's the known unknown that makes sci-fi horror its own cool genre.
I'd like to add to that because kind of tying in, when you think about science fiction, like you said, it's a lot of exploration of the what-if scenarios. What can we develop? What could happen in the future? What else is out there? But then the horror side of it is almost like the cautionary tale side. What is out there, but do we really want to know? What can we develop with technology? Or, what's gonna happen if it goes too far? The robot overlords are gonna come back via AI and it, a la Terminator. But it's a lot of looking at things almost from ethical considerations and moral considerations, as well as the dangers of humanity, of your mental state, of your emotional state. You can look at science fiction and extrapolate where are we going to go in a very utopian, idealist light, but also at the same time the dystopian. Here's the dark side. And at least that gives us the knowledge to be able to explore this full range of ideas and to contemplate what is the best road to go forth.
And of course, not all of science fiction is space-based, but a lot of it is. And in space, everything in space wants to kill you. I mean, it is so not conducive to the human being, whether it's the vacuum of space, black holes, atmospheres on planets. Space wants to kill you. It is not for humans, and that blends with horror perfectly, obviously.
I have an ecology background, and I'd like to give workshops on using ecology in your fiction, whether it's horror, science fiction, or fantasy. So I want to expand on what these wonderful people have said already. And, where do we fit in survival, in terms of our interaction with the living and non-living? That is the space that ecology explores. And I like to talk about that in terms of science fiction and how we may discover habitable zones, whether they are on another world or on our own, including in sub-ocean situations, under the deep surfaces of ice, on exomoons and things like that. And, when you explore the horror element, you are predator or you are prey, and that is another facet of ecology. Where do we fit in the living and non-living spaces of where you can survive or die? So I think science fiction and horror go very well together with ecological concepts.
I've had problems with editors and publishers before because of my sort of man-sized monster genre was one thing I primarily operate in. When I came in, they were very used to okay, well, show us the janitor being eaten by the thing in the lab, and don't show us the thing in the lab, and then you jump back and watch how that came to be. And I would rather start literally from a single cell, like my horror novel Ancestor, and then you get to watch it developing, but you as the reader, who may or may not have any scientific acumen, and explain, you don't know what it's going to be, you don't know what's going to happen, so you don't know the janitor's going to get eaten. But then, so I almost always prefer slow build myself, where there are scientifically competent characters, but there are also characters who really don't know what's going on, and you're largely side by side with them in the story. So you've got that dread, you've got that angst, and you don't know what the thing is going to wind up being. That's kind of how I operate it. And then with Ancestor, I learned a valuable lesson in publishing that was out from Random House 10, 15 years ago. And I had so much scientific detail in it that they were just red Xing through entire pages. And they were like, well, no, people have to understand this how this mitosis develops right here. And they're like, no, Scott, they don't. They can go get an encyclopedia and figure that out for themselves. And it was a valuable lesson in storytelling, because I thought the stuff was cool as hell, and a lot of you might, but the larger book buying populace would just be skipping through it. So as far as how much you put in, there needs to be a fine balance of, here's really cool stuff, but the story's still about the characters, their conflicts, how the characters interact with each other, and what trouble do they get in by interacting with each other. So you can't put in all the stuff you want, or it will become a textbook.
Much more of a mood author. I like developing voice, and I like developing atmosphere, and I like just developing a kind of a slow progression in a very natural world of what is going to happen. And I tend to write more in a historic context rather than science fiction, but as I've done science fiction and historic, I've treated them the same ways that I never do drop down into a long-term winded explanation of something. Everything is just by granted, this is what it is, and you're putting just enough historic terms or science fiction workings to explain something so that it feels authentic to the reader. And I feel that that's very important, that regardless of whatever genre you're writing in or idea, you just want it to feel natural, and you want it to feel real, and you want it to feel consistent throughout the story.
So when I write aliens, they usually come from my dreams, which is the easiest research you can do on to sleep. But I often have nightmares with strange creatures, and so that just pulls straight from that, and it's easy. But a lot of time the seed of stories for me comes from combining disparate things. Like I'll read Science News Magazine, which is a wonderful resource that just sort of summarizes what's going on in the academic journals. And I will smash one idea, and usually a scientific idea, into a societal idea or a cultural idea, and see how these things blend together. But I tend to, research is my favorite, but it's an easy place to get bogged down in and avoid your writing. So what I tend to do these days is write my story and then do my research and go back and fix it, because ultimately story and character are more important than all those scientific details. I love it when it's in there. We can learn from fiction in this way. And hard science fiction is amazing, but hard science fiction usually dates poorly. Science moves at a different rate than our biology and the evolution of our minds. Story has to come first, and it doesn't matter how many, it's easy to bog it down with the details, but I love researching afterwards. For instance, a few years ago, I wrote a Western that takes place on San Jacinto Mountain, and I went up there and climbed afterwards to see what I had gotten right and what I had gotten wrong. And it's always fun to see, where you missed and where you hit. Often in research projects, I'll look at photographs of places. For instance, I'll have maps on my walls to try and get it accurately. One book I've written took place in Madrid, in Spain, and then I went there and I was like, wow, I failed miserably in capturing what this place is really like, or what it looks like from the air in a scene that I got totally wrong. So research can go in either direction, but I prefer to do it after the core of the story is there.
For my work, I am very character-centric, and usually it's an ordinary person in an extraordinary situation, and oftentimes that person is incredibly flawed or suffering in some way, and already has lost some of their agency. And then in horror, you lose a lot of your agency much of the time. There's a power dynamic going on between predator, prey, or pursuer and pursued, for example. So I'm always weaving that in but adding science as well, because I'm a science writer. I had a degree in ecology, but I've also worked in clinical research, and I've a strong interest in astrophysics, so I like to weave all of that in. And for example, in Atacama, it starts out with somebody working in academic research, like I used to back in the lab, but she's grieving, and there's something incredible happening, both where she is as well as in the Atacama Desert. In terms of the research, because I am a science writer, and what I do is I go through science journals and I distill everything so that anybody can read it, at any level, and depending on who the client is, So for Atacama, for example, I actually love, because I'm a science writer, to interact with scientists. I've talked to many of them over the years, and in that book particularly, I interviewed a Chilean ecologist to get a sense for what's the ecology like, the Atacama Desert? And meanwhile, I'm from East Tennessee, and there's a lot of comparison in the book of Southern Appalachia and how those mountains are older than the rings of Saturn, and there's this creek factor there. But I also added in NASA's knowledge. I talked to a NASA scientist who was working in the Atacama Desert. I almost got a chance to go down there, and I really wish I had. But we had these ongoing conversations about how to add the realism and layers to that, where it's like, this is still a story about grief and agency and body autonomy and very disturbing things happening. Dune Flower is similar. You have another situation where you have an incredibly flawed character who's incredibly mean, anti-hero, mean teen queen, but she's destabilized because of not only her grief, but because of an incredible scenario of plant monsters invading. So how do you make that realistic? I try to ground the incredible to make it seem logical. And I want to think that my science background has helped that seem a little more grounded without getting bogged down in jargon. So that's kind of my approach. Again, at the end of the day, it's all about the characters. If you don't care about them, or you don't feel invested in what's going to happen, are they going to be okay? Are they going to be redeemed for being terrible, or whatever it is? And that's what matters. You've got to write something about people, or non-human people, that we want to invest in and get to know them, love them, hate them, have a feeling about them. That's it at the end of the day. I'm going to chime in and say beauty and medical horror, because we're fancy in technology for beauty, think of the substance, and how we're also constantly questioning it. We realize our mortality as we reach a certain age, and there's a lot of medical technology and a lot of cosmetic technology that we didn't used to have, and ageism is still a thing, and that creates a sort of horror science element. So I'm seeing more of that.
One thing as an editor that I find a little frustrating about trends in fiction is that the publishing industry tends to move fairly slowly. If you're writing something that's very topical, responding to a topic today, AI, pandemic, etc., by the time it gets published, readers don't want to hear about it anymore for the most part. And so there's an interesting balance between having your work be timely, but having it stand the test of time too. And so it can be frustrating to, for instance, one magazine I edited for was a speculative poetry magazine. The month of a holiday, I would always get a ton of holiday novels. That's going to end up in the next issue. No one wants to read a Christmas poem in spring. And so I think the awareness of the flow of the publishing industry and what's a magazine's schedule, sometimes a book can take years to come to fruition, film even longer. So these are things that I think writers should take into account. And also, of course we're going to respond to what's going on around us. That's one of the reasons we're creative types, is how we deal with our fears about society, for instance. But those are going to change, and as we all know, they change very quickly. And so I think when responding, it's worth thinking about the greater issues that stick with us over time. AI comes first to mind. This is behind the scenes in genre fiction. The editors have been having to come up with policies for magazines, fighting against this. It came for editors' jobs first. Grammarly, no one seemed to care about it. Then it took editors' jobs. Then it took writers' jobs. Then everyone cared. And it's a theme that we have to deal with professionally all the time. It's very frustrating. It's a tool of fascism, in my opinion. And I'm sick of stories that address it. And not that we don't need to have this conversation, we do, but at work it's a daily thing. It's very frustrating, and I don't necessarily want it in my fiction.
I actually do have a trope I don't like, and that's bridging. where the character development of, the survivor, like, their significant other has to die in order for them to reach. I hate that trope so much, and so sick of it. Historically, it's often happened to, like, a wife or a girlfriend, but it's also happened to the guys, including in Terminator, Kyle Reese, spoiler. This person has to die so that, you can have a character complete. Sure, we all have to face the fact that people we know will die. But I don't like it when it's a significant other and they're not really given much agency or character development. They're suddenly gone so that the main character can be whatever it is they need to be. Sick of that trope.
Did you call it fridging?
Fridging.
Refrigerator?
It's called fridging. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the connection between the genre and the term?
God, what is it? I don't know. Like, what's the word? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When the trope, as he mentioned, when the tropes come in waves, you're like, okay, how many post-apocalyptic survival shows are on TV in 2017? Or how many zombie shows? I just get overwhelmed with. So it's like a pulse. There's nothing really specific that I don't like. But at one point, I'm like, there's a lot of vampire stuff going on right now. Let's give publishing and television opportunities to people who are doing something other than that. But that's about it. Just when it's like you can love strawberries, but if that's all you eat for a month, strawberries suck.
Number one for me, for writers, is submitting to the wrong venue. Do a little bit of research and read the type of material that venue publishes. Slushing takes up an enormous amount of time for those of us that work in publishing. And, if I'm reading a 600, 100,000 word story, and it is not the genre that we publish or the type of books we publish, you've wasted your time and mine. I want to say yes to the material that's submitted to me, but pick up the magazine, pick up some books by that publisher, and see what they do before pursuing it. Save everybody some time, and save the disappointment of hearing that additional no, because you hear a lot of no's as a writer, right? This is not necessarily a mistake, but something I'd like to see more of. Some of the greatest horror and science fiction to me, when violence is in there, implied violence is something that's often forgotten about. Think about old horror movies where it's never on screen, the violence. It's always off screen, and that can be more effective than straight up splatter gore. No dunk on you if you like splatter, but don't forget about it implied violence.
I see a flaw, especially in the reading submissions, that there's a sacrifice of complex characters in lieu of the mystique or the action or the gore of aliens, and it's very reliant on, authors are very reliant on just a story, the story itself, on the arc, on the action, on just, I have these big ideas, and here's a crazy world, and here's a crazy piece of technology, and oh my gosh, look at this effect and how it treats people. But then they forget to actually see who that person is, rather than just a very stereotypical kind of a cardboard cutout comic persona of an individual, a type of a trope that you would really see as a background character in any pulp movie.
I would like to see writers submit something that hasn't been done before, and this is a kind of a split answer. Read your peers, not what was out 50 years ago. You can read that, sure, we've all read them, but read what's happening right now in fiction and science fiction and horror. Read diverse voices, read their stories and heritage, include your stories. I want to see what makes you tick, that only you can tell me, and make it weird as hell. Because given the fact that we are living a science fiction present that is sort of horrific, you have to really start writing some really weird stuff to stand out. Like just make sci-fi weird again. Make horror weird, like weirder and stranger and more ethereal and atmospheric, and just dig deep into your personal fears, loves, and how do you feel when you're destabilized? Like transform all of that, channel it in there, make it yours. I want to see that.
So that was a pretty interesting panel. It was really more like the opinions of people being shared, but opinions of people that are in this business. So their opinion carries a little bit more weight, and they had some interesting behind-the-scenes facts and little tips for people who are trying to get into the sci-fi horror business. So definitely one was worth checking out. It's pretty interesting. So it turns out the next panel in this room is about forensics and horror books, horror novels. So that sounds pretty interesting. So we're just going to hang out here in this room and check out this next panel and see if it's anything that's interesting and worth sharing with you guys.
My specialty happens to be forensics. I got my master's in forensic anthropology, so mostly forensics as relating to bones. There are a few main things that have to occur at every crime scene. Documentation is a big one. Like every other job, there's a lot of paperwork. Sample collection, print collection, so that would be things like fingerprints, ear prints, footprints. We've started collecting a whole lot of different types of prints to make databases to varying degrees of success. Evidence collection, which is different from sample collection. Sample collection refers to biological samples, which need to be collected and preserved differently from normal evidence, like put in the fridge. And then analyzing these things. And unlike what you see on TV, the same person does not do all of these things. And the thing that you need to remember about first responders, which can be a little bit frustrating for CSI people, is that they don't care about your evidence. They are there for other things, especially firefighters, right? They're there to keep people safe and put out the fire, and probably wash away all of your evidence. But it's usually worth it. They will just trample everywhere on everything. So once they've finished doing that, and you have a burned out husk of a place to walk through, and you're feeling a little discouraged, you still have to go through and check to make sure. Usually they'll let you know when it's safe to go in, and that is part of making contact. The first responders are always going to get there before you, because when people call 911, they are not calling the evidence collection people. They are calling the first responders. So you'll show up and you'll talk to whoever arrived there first. You're not like interviewing people, you're not actually police. So you're not like taking statements or things like that. You're speaking to the NTSB or the FBI or the police or the firefighters, whoever showed up before you. So then you do a walkthrough, which is kind of what it sounds like. This involves taking a lot of photographs. Often nowadays it's taking videos. You want to have a good sense of what the scene looked like when you first got there. So before you and your buds and everybody else started walking through, and yeah, you are getting there after the first responders, but it's still important to document with photographs, with your own notes, with sketches. Once you've done that and everything has been, we figured out where everything was, then you can start collecting evidence, marking, packaging, we call it bag and tag, establishing chain of custody. It is really important in most jurisdictions, if you are not a law enforcement officer, that when you finish packaging and marking a piece of evidence, that there is a law enforcement officer in your immediate vicinity, preferably who watched you collect that evidence and put it in. They don't have to be leaning over your shoulder, but they do need to be in the room to establish chain of custody. You've got your supervisor, you've got various law enforcement people, far more than you actually need. You probably could get away with 2 or 3. They're gonna send 10, and none of them are gonna leave. And they're gonna spend the whole time heckling you or asking you what you're doing or why you're doing it and why can't they go home, and you tell them they can and they won't. So there's just a lot of people. If there is a body, there's going to be either a coroner or a medical examiner, depending on their jurisdiction, unless the body is just bones. If it's just bones, then the CSI people it's evidence. It's not considered a body anymore. So here's a picture, that's me, at a small plane crash I won't linger on these too much because they're a little gruesome. But there were 6 people inside the plane. This was in Ohio, and we rotated, so I was in charge of the scene for that one. But that was a little complicated because the people, when you're cooked at such a high temperature, you kind of melt into whatever is around you, including but not limited to parts of the plane. So then it's a question of what do crime scene investigators actually do while they're there. So like I said, you're identifying the scene parameters, you're mapping or sketching. It doesn't matter if you can't draw. If you can make a straight line, they will ask you to map it and sketch it. They will actually ask everyone to do that so that they can compare them later. You assist in securing the scene so far as you're defining what the scene is, but I mean, you're not chasing criminals, you don't have a gun, you're not about that. You'll often notice that when the crime scene investigators show up on TV, they have small satchels from which they are totally fine and can find everything in. But in real life, we show up with enormous backpacks and quite a lot of equipment strapped to all of us. So that's everything from PPE, which is personal protective equipment. We've got scales, if we're lucky, privacy screens. That's super important if you're in the middle of like a mall or like a street where people are walking or any kind of busy way. You really don't want people to see what you're doing because they will like grab things from the scene. They'll step where they shouldn't be stepping. They'll all crowd around and like, touch things, and they don't respond very well to asking them to stop. So it's better to just have screens up. Once you've collected everything, you'll then send it off to a variety of different people. Again, unlike in TV where you've got 5 main cast members who do everything, you don't do all of this. You outsource a lot. So if you find bullet casing, you send it to a firearm examiner. If you find something organic and weird, you send that to a forensic biologist. Handwriting, there's a handwriting person. Blood, serologist. The body, medical examiner or coroner. Teeth goes to the odontologist. There's fingerprint analysts, there's toxicologists, there's the forensic anthropologists who deal with the bones, if it's just bones. There's a lot of people involved, many of whom you never actually meet. You can know more about someone the more recently they are deceased. If you find someone who just died, say 15 minutes ago, you'll be able to figure out more and be more accurate with your findings than if you find someone who died 3 days ago, than if you find someone who died 3 weeks ago, than if you find someone who died 300 years ago. It's the passage of time doesn't stop when you die. It gets much worse. Soft tissue can have things like identifying marks, tattoos, birthmarks, time of death. You can't estimate it without soft tissue. Cause of death, you don't necessarily need soft tissue, but it is very helpful. There are a lot of things that you can do to somebody that are not reflected in their bones. You can figure out their geographic location prior to death. You can test strontium levels in the hair to see where people were drinking water. And we've actually gotten pretty accurate with that. We can narrow it down within cities. So we know, like, okay, you were on the west side of Los Angeles versus the south side. Hometown, you can determine by looking at the dentin of teeth. You have certain organic markers, I believe also based on where you were drinking water when you were forming your adult teeth. The toxicology, right? You need flesh to figure that out. Last meal, we do often determine that. I don't know how helpful that is for investigators, but that's none of our business. They want to know, so we'll tell them. A lot of times when you find people, it's not 3 hours or even a week after they died. They've gone through decomposition to some or a large extent, and mostly what you have left are bones. So you can still find out a lot about somebody from their bones. Things like how old they were, their sex, their ancestry, which is not ethnicity and not race. That's a different thing. Their height, any previous injuries that affected bones, certain illnesses, possibly cause of death. I listed facial reconstruction because that's a pretty popular thing on crime shows, where they take the skull and they make a reconstruction of what the person probably looked like. So we'll address that. One of the main things that people ask when we find a body is, oh, how old are they? We always say, please wait until we finish our analyses. Why are you doing that? The first thing to look at is your dental development. If they have not finished growing in their adult teeth, you can be very precise about how old they are, because kids develop dentally on a pretty strict schedule. Once you have finished developing your teeth, the next thing to look at is called epiphyseal fusion, which is also part of growing. While you're still getting taller and longer, your certain ends of bones do not fully fuse in order to allow your bones to lengthen as you grow taller and longer. Once you've finished, so early to mid-20s, your epiphyses fuse. So once that's happened, so 23, 24, after that, the main things we look at for age are degenerative changes. We look at your ribs and we look at part of the pubic bone, and then we're not able to be as precise. There's this idea that you can put clay on a skull according to these muscle markers that were only developed concerning white males over the age of 40 and not really anyone else. And that you can miraculously recreate someone's face based on pretty exclusive features that may or may not belong to the person in question. You can't, is the answer, is what I'm hinting at here, is facial reconstruction is no better than going to a psychic. You can't really come up with anything. You certainly can't come up with things like eye color, hair consistency. It's really a shot in the dark from people who either don't know better or people who have hit a total dead end in their investigation and have no hope. A lot of things that will kill you will leave evidence in your bones, and that includes certain types of poisons, not all of them. Ballistic trauma, so a gunshot, even if what the bullet hits is soft tissue, they go so fast that they will break the bones around the soft tissue. So even if you get shot in like the outside of your arm and it misses bone, it'll still break the bone. Sharp force trauma, kind of the same thing. Even if it goes, say, in between your ribs, okay, maybe not an ice pick, but like most knives are large enough that they'll scrape the bones around them. I guess maybe the middle of the stomach you'd be safe from scraping bones, but even then, I mean, it's hard to be that precise, right?
Well, I'm glad we stayed for that one. That one wound up being pretty outstanding. I'm really fascinated by that science, and our speaker was really knowledgeable and really forthcoming and funny and interesting. Showed some gruesome photos, which I'm not going to be able to show, obviously, but this one was really, really stimulating. I really loved this one. All right, I'm seated for the final panel of the evening, which is about comedy horror. There's some pretty cool guests on this one. Sarah Nicklin, who I like a lot. Brea Grant, who everybody likes a lot. She's great. So this is going to be pretty fun. I'm looking forward to this one.
My name is Benjamin Price. I'm the co-producer on Grind, which will premiere at Sci-Fi. My favorite horror comedies, Scooby-Doo, Cabin in the Woods, and The Babysitter, actually.
Those are all good. Yeah. I was like, oh, I forgot about Cabin in the Woods. I did not put that in mind. Hi guys, I'm Terry Gamble. Nice to meet you. I'm here from Horror Movie Survival Guide, an amazing weekly podcast with my co-host right there, Juliet Landau. I love you. And we talk about horror every week. We've been doing it for almost 500 episodes coming up this year. So yeah, it's been a minute. Thank you. You can clap for that. That's fine. Yes. And I also am an actor person. I'm part of the cast of Grind that just was up South by Southwest, which was super exciting to have our premiere there a couple weeks ago with Anastasia Washington hanging out there. All these people, like half these, it's like a reunion for half of us here, which is really cool. I also have been in a bunch of TV shows and a lot of other things too. You can look me up on IMDb, Terry Gamble. Okay. And my favorite horror comedy, it's so hard, there's so many. I made a short little list of some of my favorites. I'll not gonna call them, don't worry, just a shout out, The Blackening, which came out a few years ago, which is incredible. By some wonderful people that I know, as well too, Street Geek Comedy, who started off as a sketch and then made it into a movie, which I just love the whole genesis of that. I also want to shout out some schlock from the 80s, Chopper Chicks from Zombie Town. Thank you so much, David, for knowing. Crazy lesbians riding motorcycles into a town and change the world. You know, it's good stuff. And then let's see, something else. Since he did 3, I know you said 1, but I'm giving 3. I'll say Werewolves Within because I love funny werewolves. Okay? Thank you so much.
Next we have Ned.
Hi, I'm Ned. Ned Kirschman, but my friends call me Nee Kirschman. And I do need to clarify, they offered to change it to Nee.
Your actual name?
My real name. But Ned is so much better. So you can call me Ned, and I will respond to that for probably the next 5 years. So I am a writer-director. I have a short doing the film festivals right now called Scissor Sleepover. And, my IMDb is very weirdly full of children's entertainment because I did a show for PBS. I'm a puppeteer, and I wrote and directed a show for PBS with starring Ali Sinjani, and that's probably why the kids are here today. They knew me from that, but okay, favorite horror comedy. I was gonna say Land Before Time.
Dark.
Yeah, like most traumatizing movie I've ever seen. But real answer is American Psycho. It's like the first movie that I was like, oh yeah, like that. We can. Oh, sorry to the kids. Oh shoot, that's crazy. I do keep looking around for kids. Now that you've said that, I'm gonna keep saying it for the people watching at home.
It says on the back here that we should watch out for that's why if you guys are wondering, we have a warning on the back of our cards.
So it's 9 p.m. My name's Bria. You have to talk into this. My name's Bria Grant, and I did a movie called Grind that a lot of people know. That I co-wrote and directed part of. But you also may know me from acting or a movie called 12-Hour Shift or a movie called Torn Hearts or I don't know, I've directed a bunch of stuff. And my favorite horror comedy, this is hard because there's a lot of movies that I think people don't call horror comedies, but they are horror comedies.
Yes,
but I think that there's such a weird, people don't like the name. Because we're going through this right now with Grind, where they're like, just don't call it a horror comedy and no one will buy it. But I would say Scream.
Yeah.
My favorite horror comedy, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie.
Hello everyone. My name is Andrew Scott Bell. I'm a film and TV composer. I'm the first person to speak tonight who did not work on the movie Grind. They wouldn't call me. That's okay.
Our composer is on this panel. So.
No, Matt did a great job, I'm sure. Just wanted to let you guys know that this is the first non-Grind.
Nee also was not Ned was also not part of Grind.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm gonna actually that right now.
Okay, fair. I worked on Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 1 and 2. I just finished Pinocchio Unstrung.
Which are not kids' movies.
which are not kids' movies for the half child that's here. Not kids' movies. My favorite horror comedy is Drag Me to Hell because I love the way. Yes, absolutely. Chris Young, fantastic. I got to shout out Chris Young, composer, great job. One of my favorite scores from her. The way that Sam Raimi, and he does this in lots of his movies, but I think really well in Drag Me to Hell. The way that he flip-flops like the joke and the scare, but then sometimes the scare and the joke is really, really smart. It keeps you on your toes. So I love that one. And that is just a straight up like horror comedy. Just 100%. So yeah, wonderful.
I'm Sarah Nicklin. I'm an actor and producer. I did also work on Grind. I've also worked on VHS Halloween and Popeye the Slayer Man. And I was in a kid show, Blippi, if you have a 2-year-old. I'm part of Fran. Yeah, a couple 2-year-olds, you know. My favorite horror comedy, I'm gonna pick like a subgenre because there's just too many. So I really love metal horror comedies. I have yet to see one of those films that I don't like. So like Deathgasm or Heavy Trip or like any of those types of films are just right up my alley.
Hello, my name is Matt Glass. I was the composer of a film that you haven't heard of tonight called Grind. I also did the music and was the cinematographer and producer of Bria's 12-Hour Shift, and I've done a couple other movies since then, in between them. I couldn't think of a favorite, but I'm just going to say my favorite horror comedy is Dead Alive by Peter Jackson.
Hey, I'm Brandon Espy. I co-wrote and directed Mr. Crockett. It's on Hulu and Disney Plus. And my favorite horror comedy is Tales from the Crypt, Demon Night. Impact my childhood and kind of just got me thinking like, wow, people are having fun with this. So I love the world they built.
Absolutely, I think they're a really beautiful match with each other. I mean, Julie and I spent a lot of time on her movies by talking about horror musicals as well as horror comedy, and I think similar to musicals, similar to horror, similar to comedy, they all kind of have a similar thing of experiencing the most heightened senses and the heightened parts of life, right? When things get so much, you're gonna scream, you're gonna cry, you're gonna sing. One of those things is gonna happen, right? Or you're gonna laugh like hysterically, and I feel like bringing all of those emotions together, it's kind of like the ultimate in expression and all of that. So bringing them all together makes perfect sense to me because of that heightened level. I know when Phil and I started the show, or we started the show and then we had another host that started with Julia because they actually watched every horror movie in a video store. They kept a notebook. That's how this show started over 25 years ago, for people who don't know. They didn't know they were starting a show. That's what they were doing when they were doing a rating system and watching all the movies in their video store. But one of the movies that was seminal when they were watching and when I started taking over as co-host was Hellraiser, and Julia showed it to me. And I laughed so hard when he said Jesus wept. And she's like, oh, okay, like, you're gonna be all right. Even things that are not necessarily horror comedy are funny to me, because sometimes it's like you're watching X-Files with your mom, you're like, come on, this is so stupid. And it's like, certain things will hit you in certain ways because of how heightened they are. I think that sometimes you'll also mind comedy out of stuff that maybe is not supposed to be horror comedy.
For me, I always saw them as built on surprise.
Oh yeah.
Like, one you're trying to get a laugh, the other you're trying to evoke fear, but it is all about misguiding someone to a place that is surprising. And a lot of that is from like extremes of just like how silly this actually is, what you're looking at. But there's a commitment to it that both horror, if you're not committed, it's not going to work. Comedy, if you're not committed, it's not going to work either. And so that is like, yeah, the ones that are not funny, I'm always like, they are though.
Those are sometimes the funniest.
When the question of what's your favorite horror comedy, I'm like, they are all horror comedies to me. Like Hostel 2, hilarious.
I was just talking to someone about this, how they're, the most sort of like maligned genres within film are horror, comedy, and romance, and within books, media generally, and all of those things cause a physiological response. Horror being fear, comedy being laughter, and then romance being getting turned on or whatever. And how that makes people uncomfortable when there is a physiological response that you cannot control. And so, in addition to what y'all said, which I think is also very right on, it's interesting to think about those horror and comedy being two things that they cause a response that we're not necessarily in control of or prepared for, like laughter or peeing your pants.
The way that horror and the way that comedy and the way that any genre of film works is that there's just kind of some primal feeling and emotion that kind of like rips us open and like tricks us to being off guard. And for horror, it's fear. We get scared, but then that comfort after the scare makes us like relax in our seat and hear the message of the story. And we hope that it's a well-crafted story, or maybe not, whatever. But like I'm thinking of, and this has nothing to do with comedy, but the Babadook. Maybe it is kind of funny. It is kind of funny. But like the Babadook is about grief, and I think the way that like the thing that like opens us is the fear in the story to receive, and then we receive the message about grief and family and loss. And I think the same is true about comedy. The laughter is this like primal, uncontrolled. I never thought of it as an uncontrolled response, but like we can't control it, so we let go, and then we receive like a good what is that? The Sunshine with Steve Carell. We were just talking about it. The Sunshine, Little Miss Sunshine. Hilarious movie with a really sweet story. And by the end of it, because you've laughed and like let go of all of your inhibitions, you're able to receive this really sweet story about family and loss and grief that most people don't think of when they think of comedy. They think of Anchorman, which is also a great movie, but
So I feel like they both are a way for us to process and have a cathartic response to dealing with horrible events. And through horror we do that because there's something scary that is happening in real life. You have a fear response, a trauma response, or just something that's wrong in the world, and horror puts a lens on that and examines it and amplifies it to be more monstrous. Comedy does the same thing if it's done well, because most things that are funny because they're true, because they're taking another look at something that you're experiencing and just putting it through a different lens, and again, just heightening it and twisting it. And a lot of times people have a response to these terrible things of either being scared and running away, or, oh my God, it's so terrible, I'm gonna start laughing. So I think that it's just a way for us to deal with the stuff that we experience in everyday life, just in a new, different way.
People go into horror movies specifically, and maybe all kinds of movies, looking for the emotional manipulation. Like the idea is, you're going to this movie and they're going to do something that's going to make you feel an emotion that's not actually happening to you. And that's something that as composers is kind of your job as well. Like, hey, can you make people sad at this part of the movie? And like, yeah. So you're literally just manipulating people's emotions. And I think when it works well and something is really scary, people are so surprised that the magic trick worked, like in a magic show, that makes them, laugh, excited that like they've been a part of this trick and they've seen the magic happen. They don't know how it happened exactly, but they're surprised and, relieved that it wasn't real, I guess.
Yeah, for me, high stakes leaves space for people to do stupid things. And then I think that could go both ways when it comes to horror and it comes to comedy too. Because you put certain people in certain situations, that ends up happening. I think comedy, it succeeds when you don't build a joke within that dialogue, but build it within the reaction and their situations and circumstances. And so I think since both genres have those high stakes, that's what really has the commonality between the two. And then what makes it really hits is how it resonates. How that fear resonates to somebody, how those certain nuanced part of what someone does, maybe that a certain auntie, what she does, it resonates with certain people within a certain audience. That makes people post about it and all these other things. And I feel like that's how certain successful comedy and horror spread. So.
There are times where I really hate horror comedies specifically, like as far as trends go. I always think about Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which I feel like got unnecessarily maligned because it's actually a great movie.
So
but when it came out, people were like, fuck that movie. And like, I think it was actually funny. It was more of a comedy than a horror movie. Yeah. But I think at the time we were not making funny horror. We were really going like, I think it came out at the same time as You're Next or something like that, which was kind of funny. But like, I remember seeing both of
one of
those.
my favorite horror comedies.
Yes, but very different horror comedies.
Yes,
Your Next is very grounded. Tucker and Dale is like a comic book. I mean, it was over the top. And so I think we go through. Yeah, and I think we could go through phases of like what is the cool horror comedy and like how far we can push it.
Yeah.
And I feel like right now we're actually at a time where we can really push it. Like there's a lot of really kind of out there like weirdo comedies with horror in them and vice versa.
More often comedy is going to age out than horror because I think as society evolves, things that if you go back and look at some comedies, they are not okay anymore. But I think that the horror elements, things that scare us, do continue to remain fairly consistent. So it's threading that needle of like how to mix those things together. But I also think like when you're creating like a horror comedy and trying to figure out the timing of it, that a lot has to do with editing. It doesn't really have to do, I mean, some of it is what you're doing on set and just like how you feel it coming together, but through sound as well, like that can make a huge difference in terms of the timing and what's going to hit and what's going to not. And that's one of the wonderful things about working in films, that it's such a collaboration. And everyone has these different voices and ideas of how to put the pieces together.
One of literally my favorite things about horror in general is the fact that I really feel like it ages with its audience. Like there were so many things that I watched as a kid that were only horror. Like what you were saying, Brea, like you were talking about Nightmare? Tremors, right. You only saw it as a horror film. I saw Dream Warriors on TV and I was like, this is terrifying. And when Freddy Krueger says, welcome to primetime, bitch, I was like, that's the scariest moment. He put her through a television. See it as an adult. I'm like, that is a comedy. This is a comedy movie. Like it was all. So I think that is like a beautiful thing about it. Like I would imagine like sharing it with a kid, being terrified, and you're just like, oh wait 20 years. And you're laughing at all that stuff. Like Chucky.
Oh, Chucky made me laugh.
Chucky, as a kid?
Yes, I was kind of a dark kid. But
well, I was a dark kid too, and I was terrified of that talking Chad.
But also a big part of creating that, I think, ultimately is the story of tone and just having a clear direction and vision. Like the director knows like what the tone and the vibe is going to be, and if everyone kind of knows what movie they're in, that helps. Because definitely, Juliet and I, we've seen some movies where like these people don't know they're in the same movie. You know, you watch movies sometimes where like that person is doing a whole other thing, and that does not come together. But if you're all clear, you're all on the same team, and you know it's going to be funny, and you know, like, usually funny means you're all going to be really serious most of it. Like, you're really, really invested, like, over-invested. You have a serious soundtrack that crescendos, like you said, and changes and heightens that thing.
In the line of horror comedy, I would say lean more forward, because it's up to the audience to decide whether it's comedic or not. When you choose comedy, it's a lot of comedy is not good comedy. But comedy that doesn't age, comedy that ages well is situational. Comedy that doesn't age well is cultural. So if you have like a Cabin in the Woods where it's just a situation, people in a precarious environment, that's funny. They're making choices, trying to figure stuff out. Something like a scary movie that's like a parody, like you can tell how old someone is based off of which one is their favorite. It capitalizes a specific cultural moment, like the "What's Up" meme from like the first one, or like the Matt Quest joke from Scary Movie 4. You know, it's like,
There's a Matt Quest joke from Scary Movie 4?
Yeah, the grudge boy like vanishes, and
I've never seen
she goes, "Where is the house?" And it's like it goes off the wall. When you lean too far to the comedy and you're trying to get like Brandon said, the quick laugh or the trope or the thing that's out right now, it's not going to make it. But when your comedy is more situational, more focused on the visuals and the editing and the scene and the writing, that's going to last you for live forever. Because I can show someone Freddy Krueger any time of the day, but like anything beyond that, or like I could just sit in the movie right now. But even like more movies in that vein and try to be more funny. Like The Blackening, I also loved it. It might not make it.
Don't talk to me like that.
I'm excited where it's going. Like, I think we've gotten like a lot of diverse voices happening in horror, which has been a long time coming. And I love seeing the effects getting better and better. People going back to practical is very exciting. And I like genuinely like don't want horror. This is gonna sound weird, but I like don't want it to get too much respect, because I think it really.
But it just won all the Oscars.
Well, it could have won more Oscars. I wouldn't have been mad about that. But I do think it exists. So it has always been like a place for like outcasts and misfits and weirdos and freaks. And I think as it gets more respect, people might start getting afraid to say the things that need to be said. And I think it very much should, like, I didn't even realize how satirical horror was until later in life. And then I was like, oh, all the things that I was trying to say in comedy where it was not allowed, like, that's where horror exists. That's all they were always pushing the envelope in a way that I never want that to be taken away.
I had a tremendous amount of fun with that one. These people are my kind of people. They just sit there talking about horror comedies and just having a blast. They're all very, very funny. Hopefully I left a lot of the clips of them being funny in there. That's all of them back there. We get to meet a few of them. They are really cool people. They're happy to sit there and talk horror with you. It's pretty neat. So this was a good one to wrap up the evening on. Okay, day 3, the final day of WonderCon. We're gonna do some shopping on the floor, try to get some cool stuff, maybe catch one panel, and then call it a weekend. So stay tuned, we'll let you know if you can find anything cool. It is far less crowded today than it was yesterday. Look at that. Y'all are gonna try to take all my money.
Ah, good.
With the Laurel and Hardy, Nancy Drew. Yeah. All right, last panel for the con is going to be a 50th anniversary for Jaws. So of course I'm going to check this one out because I love me some Jaws, and it's one of the classic horror movies, and it's sharks. So hopefully this one's going to be good. Keep tuned. I'll let you know in a second.
My first guest is someone who has spent a career celebrating and roasting deeply understanding movies we all love, including ones that terrified us, a whole generation really, out of the water. You know him as the founder of Film Threat, a champion of independent film, and a voice that's never afraid to say what he thinks, right? He's interviewed countless filmmakers, dissected Hollywood from inside and out, and somehow made film criticism seem like a full contact sport. So it only makes sense to have him here to talk about how this movie changed everything and how the way we looked at the ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Chris Gore! Of Film Threat. And then our next guest, well, when it comes to Jaws, or the saying, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water, he wrote The Ultimate Companion. In fact, it was called Just When You Thought It Was Safe, a Jaws Companion. He's the author, that's the name of his book, and he takes a deep dive into making a legacy and a lasting impact on the film, so we think twice about going into the ocean. Some of us pools, right? Because he spent years exploring stories behind him and the chaos behind the scenes, which is why we still hear this music in our heads. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce probably the biggest Jaws fan. I mean, literally, the guy's like 6'7", Pat Jankowitz.
Detroit, you're here, I'm going to slander our homeland.
And our next and final, well, our next guest anyways, she helped form what became, well, it was kind of modern horror. She's a writer for Fangoria, and she is one of the iconic voices of horror journalism. She dives into films that thrill and haunt us, and thanks to Jaws, occasionally keep us out of water. She's part of a new generation carrying that torch, exploring these stories and enduring audiences while they still crave the perfect mix of suspense and fear. So without further ado, please give it up for Steph Canning. All right.
I saw Jaws as a kid, and it was a phenomenon. You know, now movies and pop culture kind of digested very quickly. They come out, they stay for a couple weeks, and then we're on to the next thing. But Jaws played for at least a year that I remember in initial release, and then it went to second run theaters. It played all year, and then the following year, of course, Star Wars came out, and that played for a year. So there weren't movies that were like that. They played for a month or so, but they were gone. There was something enduring about it. Obviously, I grew up in Michigan.
Yeah, big show.
Yeah, that's right.
Detroit boys over here.
That as well, and we would go to lakes and swim, and it was so relatable. It was something, that fear of the unknown, what's underneath the surface of the water. I think that just is something in our lizard brain that let's, as humans, right? Let's not get eaten or killed by some predator. So that's in our lizard brain. I think that's why zombie films, running away from zombies, those are popular. It's anything that taps into something in our lizard brain resonates, and Jaws resonated. Also, it's a great male friendship story.
Yeah.
We don't get as many of those these days, just male friends and bonding and courage and different ways of trying to solve a problem. They're all trying to save the same problem. There's just so many things that make it timeless. But I really think it's that tapping into our lizard brain that's made it resonate to today. And God, I remember seeing that and as a kid, and well, I slept with the light on. That's how I handled any horror film that scared me as a kid. I could not get to sleep at night because I would start thinking about it. The light came on. It was that and John Carpenter's The Thing that did that to me. I was older when The Thing came out, but still the same effect. So that's my theory anyway.
How can I match that great answer?
I know.
Knowing you, I'm sure you're going to find out a way how.
Right, I will try. I think, like he said, it's the fear of the unknown, something coming at you, the thing under the bed. And like he said, what you forget about a lot of these 70s movies is they're bigger and darker and more interesting than modern movies. Modern movies, it's A to B to C. But when you look at Jaws, like he said, it's three different guys from a different economic stratus, and they all have the same problem, and they're all coming at it from different ways. Clint is kind of embittered blue collar. Brody is middle class, in the middle trying to filter both their answers. And Hooper, of course, is wealthy, which they make 1,000 jokes about in the movie.
Sticky hands.
When you look at the movie, it's the middle class hero who uses everything he learned from Clint and Hooper. Clint is dead, Hooper has fled, Brody uses Clint's gun and Hooper's air tank, therefore making it a team effort at the very ending, when they've all taken off. It's an amazing ending. There's nods to the creature in the Black Lagoon. You actually hear the creature in the Black Lagoon when the shark is going into the silt. Spielberg also uses that in Duel. But it's the fear of the unknown. And like him, when I finally got my mom to take us to the drive-in on a re-release of Jaws, because it was too intense for little Ricky here. I wasn't 6'9" then. So when we saw it at the drive-in, My baby brothers were in the car, so my mom would shout, "Cover your eyes," and even though I wanted to see it, your mom is giving you a commandment. We saw it with Orca, and I remember Orca was so terrible in comparison to Jaws. It was like, it's 2 years later, you should be even better, but it wasn't. You would go to every Jaws ripoff as a kid, like a drug addict, trying to get that high. And there was only like 2 movies that would actually deliver it. Alligator, because it's so wild. Alligator is Mad Magazine Jaws. And Robert Forster, brilliant movie. And Piranha, both written by John Sayles. John Sayles knew he was slumming, and even though he was slumming, he threw in as many asides for the hipsters in the audience. The first guy to get eaten in an alligator is a sewer worker named Ed Norton. So, it's high class. I mean, the great thing about Alligator, just to mention, I know it's a Jaws panel, the alligator comes out of the sewer. He eats his way up to economic stratus, which means John Sayles was studying Jaws, the whole class struggle in Jaws. The alligator eats his way all the way up to the evil CEO who made him, which is kind of a brilliant Roger Corman eat the working class angle on it. So your turn, Steph.
I know you guys kind of stole my answers already.
I could talk, Chris.
That was pretty good. You did a good job, though.
That was great.
From a writer's perspective, it is the perfect story. It's the perfect 3-act structure, which of course I always love. As somebody who writes primarily horror, talks about horror, I talk more about horror in my writing than I do actually write it. It's rare that a horror story can start from the first few seconds or minutes of the movie and carry all the way through and deliver with a great ending. Sometimes, it might grip you the first half and then the second half it falls off, and but you've got, like they said, one of my favorite things about it is you have 3 characters who all have the same motivation but different reasons for it. Quint's reasons are more just for, it's just more selfish. And with Brody, he feels a little bit of guilt. He feels a sense of responsibility to Amity to protect the citizens. And then you have Hooper, who's just kind of, there for research. He's
Mr. Fancy Pants.
Yeah. So, and then let's not forget, of course, the thing that brought us out here, that score. If you don't have a good score with your film, it's not going to feel the same as it would if you have something that's going to really grip you. So you've got a movie that absolutely grabs you, terrifies you. Probably the most terrifying opening sequence to a horror movie. In fact, I read an article about that as well.
Yeah.
And from there, it pulls back a little, gives you enough background on these characters to care about them and what's happening. And that's a rare feat, especially in horror, especially back then, to execute in a way that it can be remembered 50 years later.
What the movie is also about is triumphing. And it is one of those endings that every time I've seen it, everyone cheers at the end, right? When the shark blows up, everyone cheers. That hopeful, fun, that release of yes, evil is defeated. And I think we've gone through this phase, especially in a lot of pop culture films and TV and whatnot, where dark and dystopian has dominated, I think, for far too long. Seriously, if you tell me that another thing, this is the Empire Strikes Back of this, we're doing this, but it's gonna be dark. I think we're done with dark. I think dark, and
no more dark.
An indication of that is Project Hail Mary, for those who've seen it.
It's a beat. It's a Charles Tip scenario, isn't it? Everyone working together.
The world needs more stories like Project Hail Mary right now.
But that sense of hopefulness, that sense of those summer movies we went to where evil was defeated in the end, a simple story. There were a lot of those I grew up with. I was very lucky to be around in that era when those movies became popular. My hope is they will again. That's why I think Jaws has endured. And Quentin Tarantino actually says Jaws is the greatest movie ever made.
He's not wrong.
But he qualifies it, it's a movie, not a film, movie.
Well, give him credit. That's very fair to say.
Yes,
you know?
yeah, I would agree with them. But a lot of the, the actors that are in the movie were not actors, they were locals.
That's true.
Which gives the movie to kind of document, it feels more authentic the way it was cast.
Yeah, it was all local. All the townspeople are really, because when I did the book, I went back, he's right, I'm sorry.
Please, jump in.
I went back to Martha's Vineyard and I interviewed all the locals. The fact that Mrs. Kittner is a local hire, any of you with a SAG card in the audience, a local hire is when you grab somebody, usually for a, hey, he went that away type scene.
Yeah.
But for this,
Pretty much my acting career.
But when you go for a big emotional moment like Mrs. Kittner, they hired the theater teacher on the island. This really wonderful lady. I got her in the book before she passed. I have copies. I'm a capitalist, so if you want them afterwards.
Plug it away.
But the good thing is, she was a local hire. You would never trust. She slaps her leading man. You would never trust a local hire with this.
It's absolutely a horror movie. You just have to look at the first opening scene to, verify that. The interesting thing about horror is it does not need to be your typical slasher. I think, if you say horror, a lot of people will picture, Freddy or Michael Myers, and that is horror, of course. That's what has defined the genre, but the genre is constantly changing. Look at horror today, not necessarily the same as what we had in the 70s. So horror can be psychological, horror can be environmental, horror can be, a crazed killer, it could be zombies. So I don't know if there's anything scarier than knowing that there is something out there that is uncontrollable, that it's up to just a few people to try and stop. And it's just swimming and taking lives. And it's based off of, by the way, true story.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Loosely. But
The Jersey Shore attacks.
there was some actual shark attacks that people
Shack
actually,
attack.
shack attack.
Yeah, that guy was great, wasn't he? His accent. Wicked good interview.
So, if you take something that could happen, even if it's rare to any of us, I would like to think that there's probably never going to be a zombie apocalypse. I could be proven wrong one day, but you never know. But, any of us could go out swimming and
Save yourselves.
enjoy your day at the beach after I just said that. But, a horror cannot be put into one category, and that's what I love about it. That's why I love writing about it, because all of us have different fears. Not everyone is afraid of the same thing. If we all saw the same movie with the same scary antagonist, it'd get pretty boring after a while.
Because Jaws was the first horror movie to make more money than any movie in history up to that point. That's why you had the horror boom 4 years later. It takes every trend 4 years to get on the bandwagon. So in 1979, when you had more horror movies out than at any point since the 1940s, you got Alien, which was pitched as a Jaws in space. You got a ton of horrors, and the magazine she and I both write for, Fangoria magazine, came out of that as well. Sean Cunningham, that'll shut up, guys. Sean Cunningham, writer, producer of Friday the 13th, told me he called the killer in the movie the shark. And he said he was really sad when they were cutting off if you haven't seen Friday the 13th, you've had 46 years. When they cut off Mrs. Voorhees' head and the climax, he remembered thinking, sadly shooting it, thinking, who's going to be our shark now? We killed our shark.
I think the main reason the Jaws sequel sucked is because Spielberg was not involved.
Yeah.
Probably wisely. He's not a big fan of making sequels to his
We had a little thing called Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, that's true, but his E.T. There's movies sort of in the same vein of his films. The Raiders, he made sequels to the first Raiders, but he was not involved in those Jaws sequels. And lately, I'm talking in the last 5 years, there has been a flood of Jaws-inspired shark movies. So much so, we did a category at Film Threats Award Show, Award This.
Oh, that's a great
where we
award
did the best shark movie. movies like, and you look up these trailers, these are all real movies. Jurassic Shark, Ouija Shark, Shark Exorcist. Like these are like Asylum movies that are terrible. In fact, Asylum rushed out. You can find the trailer and find the movie right now. The Final Hail Mary, which is inspired by Project Hail Mary. So yeah, they're really good at that. So, but there are so many bad shark movies. I don't know. The only Jaws sequel I kinda was entertained by was Jaws 3D.
In 3D,
because of the 3D, it was kind of fun. Still not a good film, but the 3D saves it.
I saw the charcoal drawings Joe Alves did. You were going to see the shark all through Chrissy's attack. You were going to see him come up. The one BS thing that really drives me crazy, it keeps showing up online. They keep going, here's the scene that's nightmare fuel, where you see Alex Kittner being taken. They storyboarded that. They storyboarded this horrible shot of the kid like this, and the shark was going to come up and take him. And that's everything you see on those photos is them trying to take it. Joe Alves, who designed the shark, designed the movie, directed Jaws 3D, built the shark. Joe Alves wanted that scene to work. Spielberg had him do all the shark stuff because he was personally responsible for it. He told me, because it's a brilliant, you'll see it in his Jaws book, hardback book at Barnes & Noble. He wanted to, designing Jaws, I believe it's called. They wanted to have the kid laying on the raft like this. It would have been horrifying, and the thing comes up with its mouth open. But because they were doing it with 1970s technology, they were using a mannequin as well as the real kid and a stuntman wrapped in a black garbage bag so you don't see him. What happened is every time the shark surfaced, it would push, because the motion of it coming up from underneath would push the raft out of the way. That shot is not in the movie because they couldn't get the shot. They couldn't figure out a way to hold the raft in place for the shark to do that.
But that scene might be one of the scariest deaths in the whole film.
Yeah.
I mean, I was around Alex Kittner's age when I saw the film, right? And that where you don't really see where the shark is, you see kind of the fin flip a little bit, the raft pull down, the gusher of blood. What they ended up doing instead of that, which would have been, just more obvious, I think is more horrific, knowing what, how he suffered. I just think it really tapped into the zeitgeist. And we don't see a lot of movies today that are able to do that. I don't think what's the anxiety that everyone's feeling about the world right now? And both Jaws and Star Wars, as you pointed out, kind of tapped into that zeitgeist at the right time. I don't think we've seen a movie like that recently, but it just somehow did. You mentioned the class, the class struggle in there, right? From working class to upper class to blue collar, Brody in the middle. Kind of it really just I think hit, along with again lizard brain stuff going on. So I'm sure
I think it was an event, and like Chris and Pat mentioned earlier, it was in theaters for a year. We don't see that anymore. Movies don't stay in theaters. They're in theaters for a few weeks if we're lucky, and then they're on streaming. And I think that was one of the first movies where people would go and see it and tell their friends, you gotta go see this, and then they would go, and they would go the second time and a third time.
So that was pretty good. That was kind of fun. I got some hardcore Jaws fans telling some cool stories that are about the production and behind the scenes. Not maybe as quite as dialed in as the actual people who worked on the movie, but very knowledgeable and very enthusiastic. So it's a little bit infectious. So it was definitely worth checking out. And for the last panel of the con, not too bad at all.
I can see him. There's.
He's up for adoption.
Ooh, we got 2 already.
I have
3.
Amazing. I feel like this is just straight easy.
Yes, and you were in Halo later.